Good day, everybody. How are you doing? Welcome to the final session of Community Visions for Environmental Justice. My name is Jameson Christopher Davis. I am current co-chair of the Environmental Justice Law Society at Vermont Law School, also known as EJLS. I am joined by past co-chair and co-host for today's event, Ariel King. On behalf of the Environmental Justice Law Society, I welcome you to our panel titled Back to the Future, America's Youth Organizing for Environmental Justice. EJLS is now in its third year partnering with Duke Environmental Law and Policy Clinic and the Yale School of Forestry and the Environment. This year, we have the pleasure of expanding to include the HBCUs, Shaw University, and Howard Law School. We have a jam-packed day of inspirational speakers, dedicated advocates, and organizations. So let's get started. EJLS would like to acknowledge the Abenaki people as the traditional land caretakers of the Endakina, which includes parts of Vermont, New England, and Quebec. As guests on this unceded territory of the Abenaki people and the Mohican people, we honor their ancestors, elders, and relations past, present, and emerging.
Good afternoon, everyone. Since the conference was intended to be in person, and when it was supposed to be in person, it was going to be at Howard University in Washington, D.C., we also want to acknowledge the Nakatunk and Anacostan tribes of the Washington, D.C. area. And so now you will see in your chat function that there are resources for you to be able to find your own areas where Indigenous peoples are living. And so we ask first for the rest of your meetings from now on that you try to include land acknowledgements, whether you are in person or virtually, just as this. Thank you. And so if you wouldn't mind, please adding your where you are viewing this presentation from today in the chat so that we can see where everyone is joining us from.
Thank you, Ariel. So as I said earlier, we have a jam-packed event today. So we ask you to keep your cameras off and stay muted. There will be a question and answer function at the end of each main guest speaker that we have today. So feel free when that time comes to put your questions in the chat. We'll be pulling out of those. So before we get started, I'd like to introduce a environmental justice general body member, Christine Paul.
Good afternoon. My name is Christine Paul. I'm a general body EJLS member, and it's my pleasure to introduce John Paul from Sunrise Movement, who will be telling us a bit more about their work.
Thank you, Christine. So I will tell you a little bit about Sunrise Movement. Unfortunately, John is not able to join right now. So the Sunrise Movement is a 501 political activist organization that advocates political action on climate change. It was incorporated in 2017, and the group's goal was to elect proponents of renewable energy in the 2008 mid-elections. So we appreciate the ability to highlight Sunrise Movement, and we ask that you all take time to get to know the organization and some of their work. And so at this time, we want to get started with our first speaker. So our first speaker is Leah Thomas. Leah goes by the pronouns she and her. Leah is an intersectional environmental activist and a co-communicator based in Southern California. She's passionate about advocating for and exploring the relationship between social justice and environmentalism, and identifying the ways in which injustices are happening to marginalized communities and the earth are interconnected. To say, you could say that Leah's trying to make the world a little more equal for everyone and a little nicer to our home planet. She graduated from Chapman University in 2017 with a BS in Environmental Science and Policy with a cluster in Comparative World Religions. Leah remains committed to sparking conversations and mobilizing the environmental community to be anti-racist and not complacent, and encouraging and inspiring all members of our planet to explore new places, live more sustainably, and practice radical self-acceptance. In 2020, Leah launched Intersectional Environmentalist, a platform for resources, information, and action steps to support intersectional environmentalism and dismantle systems of oppression in the environmental movement. Leah has been featured in publications such as Vogue, Teen Vogue, and more. She has collaborated with brands such as Dove, West Elm, and Allbirds. And lastly, Leah also consults with companies to integrate intersectional environmentalism and social justice into their brands, mission statements, strategies, and special projects. Without further ado, I greatly and gladly introduce Leah Thomas.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for having me. That was a lovely introduction.
Thank you for making time to come speak with us. I know you're extremely busy, you have so much going on. We have a ton of people on here who would love to hear from you. So I'd like to open up just by asking you, tell us about your journey and tell us how you got to this point.
Absolutely. Well, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri in the Midwest, if anyone is familiar, a little small town called Florissant, right outside of St. Louis. And I feel like a lot of Midwesterners want to go to either coast because there's just something about the Midwest being right in the middle. So yeah, I ended up on the West Coast. I was always really passionate about biology and ecosystems ecology. I started studying biology, but I was really gravitating towards the classes where we were talking about like trees and like carbon sequestration. So I was like, there's something's going on here. So I decided to go back home to Florissant. I think this was the summer of 2014. And I was thinking about what I wanted to change my major to. And I found a really cool environmental science and policy program. So I had about 2 weeks before I was about to go back to school and start my new major. And unfortunately, that's when the events of the Ferguson uprising happened in my community. So seeing that happen, you know, my whole family was really involved in the protests and things like that. It was really traumatizing and it was really scary. And then going back to school in the midst of that, I felt like I was kind of abandoning my community in a lot of ways, and I had a lot of guilt. And then I'm starting my classes about the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. Meanwhile, you know, people are getting tear gas back home in Florissant and Ferguson. So I had this kind of cynicism, I guess I would say. Like, thankfully, I've gotten over that and I've found rest and joy in my life, you know, years later. But I was frustrated because I was one of the only Black students in my environmental science program. And I was learning about all these laws that were meant to protect all people. But the more I dove into the data, built maps from data sets, I saw that it wasn't just one or two environmental injustices that Black and Brown communities were facing at higher rates, but as I'm sure all of us know, it was almost all of them. So it was like every time I was turning the page, whether it was clean air, clean water, access to green spaces, all of it. And it just was really confusing to me. And I felt like I really needed to go back in history, learn about the environmental justice movement, all of the players in the space, what they've been advocating for, and find ways to raise awareness in some of the spaces that I was in. Because something that I found, whether it was being a National Park Service ranger intern or working in corporate sustainability at a place like Patagonia, or being a little bit involved in the climate movement, a lot of the spaces that I was in weren't really reflective or representative, and social justice and environmental justice almost seemed like this optional add-on. And I feel like that's completely unacceptable. And even at the school that I was at, there was no environmental justice requirement to obtain an environmental science and policy degree. And because of that, there's so many universities across the country where they might have a class or two about environmental justice, But there's so many environmentalists that are graduating from these programs not really understanding the inequity. So when I met with environmentalists that don't understand the inner connections between social justice and environmentalism, I almost can't blame them, because the way that our academic system is set up, some of those classes aren't being, mandated. But I guess to get back to my career a little bit, so I was working at Patagonia. I really enjoyed that because they, as a corporation, I thought it was really cool the way that they were able to use some of those funds to go directly to grassroots activism. And I started my own blog, which was called Green Girl Food at the time. And I was, talking about a bunch of eco-friendly foods. I was also, trying to educate an audience in an accessible way about alternative products that they could be trying, or even ones that were more accessible to them. So that's how I started out actually doing product reviews initially, because I was also getting frustrated in the low waste space. It felt like you had to buy the most expensive things to be considered a sustainability person. So I wanted to show people, okay, even if it's just your local corner store, or even if, this isn't the most sustainable, most expensive brand, here's a place where you can start. So through that, I guess you could call it eco communications, just trying to find a way to communicate with the everyday person about sustainability, environmental justice in a way that is, a little bit more accessible. And that led me to creating the Intersectional Environmentalist platform with my friends, mostly because when I started talking about environmental justice and intersectionality, Kimberly Crenshaw, and how that theory can be applied to environmentalism, there were so many people who were like, yes, I've been in this space for a long time. How can we build community? We got to get together. We gotta get together. We gotta support each other. And then also there are a lot of people who are like, I want to learn now. What do I read? What do I write? What do I do? What do I watch? And I didn't want that emotional labor to just be directed at the nearest, Black person, maybe in their classes. So we built a website of databases of what to read, what to watch, who to follow, what organizations to support. And that's essentially what we do at IE, just trying to find accessible ways to talk about climate justice, environmental justice, because I think environmental justice history should be mandatory in any type of environmental program, and not that any science or natural history program. So yeah, that's what I'm up to.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that detailed rundown. IE does amazing work uplifting Black women voices as well. And I'd like to just kind of, I guess, hear more about how you've taken IE and how you really focused on the organizing piece, and how you use that to leverage, educating, because there's, so many youths that follow you, and so many individuals that look up to you, and finally see somebody who looks like them in this space. And so I know it's sometimes a heavy burden, but if there's anybody that has that leadership quality, we obviously know it's you. So if you can just kind of talk a little bit about, that how you use IE to organize and to kind of get that word out there about education.
Yeah, so we've been up and running for going on 10 months now, which is just so wild to me. And I guess the reason why IE was created in so many ways is, so I guess over last summer, my personal platform was, receiving a bit of attention. And I thought, this is cool. But however, there again are so many other players in the space for a long time. And, individual amplification doesn't necessarily lead to community liberation. So finding a way to have a separate platform from my own that is community driven, with a council of over 20 diverse, environmental activists or educators, where we can hold ourselves accountable. And right now, the majority of what we've been doing is, a lot of education. We're releasing our new website next week, which I'm really excited about. But we've also had something called the Corporate Accountability Program. So we've been meeting with about 25 people from 10 different companies, some of them are rather large, about how to have more reciprocal relationships with organizers, and like if they want to partner with an activist, how they can make sure that they are empowering the work that they're doing, because we really believe in wealth distribution, and that some of these corporations should be funding that directly to activists and not necessarily through a nonprofit structure all the time, even if it means sending an activist like a Venmo or, donating to their GoFundMe, whatnot. So I think right now that's where we're at, really just trying to figure out that wealth distribution component. And yeah, I think some people might be like, Leah, why are you working with these companies? This is not what activists do. But again, I don't personally call myself an activist necessarily. That title sometimes comes with a lot of responsibility, as it should. But that's something that I found, okay, if this is something that I can leverage through my blog and somehow redirect those funds elsewhere, I feel like, that's what I'm going to do, but never with an oil company or a company that's doing something terrible. But in terms of the organizing piece, we're really excited to launch our nonprofit arm. We filed and everything, and it's in the works. And we'll be launching something called IE School, which is really exciting because we believe in open education. Also check out Slow Factory. They're doing an open education program, but we'll have, lectures and things like that that are free and taught by, like BIPOC professors and whatnot on a variety of different topics. So that's a really exciting thing that we're going to be doing. And hopefully we can also get a little bit more involved in lobbying as well and community events when the world opens up.
Wow. I mean, when do you sleep is a question. So much.
But really, I have an answer for that too, because I think, my mom is a wonderful, beautiful Black therapist, and I'm so glad that I've had her in my life. I'm really inspired by the NAP Ministries, Audre Lorde, even Angela Davis has been talking about self-care a lot more recently, because I think sometimes in activist spaces, it's almost like you got to prove yourself that you're constantly on, you are struggling, you're not taking any money from anybody, like you are just struggling for the cause. And I think it can be a little harmful and a bit toxic, especially to BIPOC, because we deserve joy. We deserve rest. We don't always have to be on. We don't exist solely for the education of people outside of our identity group. So I think that's why with IE, we're also trying to move forward, like the NAP Ministries messaging and all, even the Black Panthers talked about the importance of self-care. And we're trying to, continue that on to this next generation, that rest and joy are also radical acts in the society that we live. So when I see a Black and brown person smile, that warms my heart. And I know that that's a radical act in the world that we live in. So I hope people can really, put that into their environmental practice as well.
You are just giving all the keys right now. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I mean, you talked about all the things that you're involving yourself in. You mentioned the importance of self-care. There's people who are watching right now, who are going to be watching in the recordings as well, who are going to want to try to follow in your footsteps and kind of build their own path to identifying the areas in which they can have an impact. So my question is, what are some of your best practices for organizing like your peers? Like what are some of your tools and strategies, and has that changed since the pandemic?
Absolutely. And yeah, I feel like with the pandemic, there's been a lot of online education, like, just for safety concerns. I completely understand if people aren't able to like take it to the streets right now, but there are also a lot of people who are, shout out to them. But I also think it's really important for people to also consider like disabilities when it comes to activism. Like sometimes online activism is the most accessible thing for a lot of people. So I think that's something to consider, because sometimes there can be very gatekeepingness of like, no, my activism doesn't look like this. Da-da. And I don't, it takes all of us to save our home planet in a bunch of different ways. But I think I would say, find what you are good at or something that you enjoy and what you're passionate about. And then, put that to the movement, because the movement needs accountants. We got to get our finances in order. The movement needs artists. We need those good fonts to be able to, put our messages out there. The movement needs creatives, because I think that creatives are an incredible vehicle for change. So I think, figuring out what you are good at personally, you don't have to be someone that you're not. Like with me personally, I am like kind of a shyer person. It might not seem like that, but I have social anxiety. And I am not the person with the megaphone all the time, but in so many ways, writing and creating, that's my megaphone. And that's how I can sit and think and process. And that's how I feel like I can contribute. So I think, yeah, that's an important thing, figuring out whatever you're good at. And I saw that at Patagonia when I was working there, because it's a whole team of like 500 people doing a variety of different things. But in some way, it's contributing to environmentalism, you know, so you don't have to be an environmental science person or an even environmental justice scholar, because I've honestly learned way more about environmental justice from just talking to Black and Brown and Indigenous folks like in their communities. They know, because they are facing environmental injustices every single day, and they didn't need a degree to tell me that. So I think, yeah, just less gatekeeping, finding what you're good at and applying it to the movement in some way.
Thank you. So you mentioned, social anxiety, and that's a piece, as you said, and I can speak from my own personal experience in terms of right now, especially Black folk who find themselves in the environmental sphere and environmental culture right now. They're leaned heavily on, especially since the unfortunate incidents in the past year with the deaths of so many of our brothers and sisters, where there are people leaning on these Black folks to do more than just environmental work. They sometimes mix in anti-racism work. They mix in so many different things. And so part of the reason why we even have a section of our program today to focus on self-healing and self-care is just that it's important to remind people that, as you said very elegantly earlier, that it's you have to think about yourselves, and you can't lean too much on these individuals to do everything, right? And so I just wanted to ask a question in terms of when you feel this kind of social anxiety and maybe some even imposter syndrome, right? Being in some of these rooms, maybe some of these executives, whatever the case may be, what are some of the things you do to kind of help, bring you back to the fold, or what kind of things could you put out there for individuals to follow?
Yeah, I guess first addressing imposter syndrome. So there's this lovely quote by Dr. Maya Angelou where she's talking about having imposter syndrome. So she was saying something along the lines of like, I wrote 4 books, but I'm still looking over my corner every single day, looking over my shoulder every single day, thinking somebody's going to say, oh my God, you're a fraud. And I was thinking one of the greatest writers of all time, oh my God, Dr. Maya, still had imposter syndrome. And it's very prevalent, especially in Black and Brown communities where there's a lack of representation. So sometimes when we're in these spaces, there is that feeling of like looking over our shoulder. And sometimes there's a feeling of guilt, because that's something that I personally struggle with, because there's so many people for me who have been environmental justice advocates, have been talking about this work. And then just because the timing of a post that I posted, just because of a variety of different factors, whether it's me being younger, whether it's colorism, whether it's whatever it is, allowed me to have this platform. So that's not something that I take lightly, but I also don't allow that to let imposter syndrome win, I guess. And it's what I try to do with that is like, you know what? Fake it till I make it. So even if I don't feel like I deserve to be in this space, I do, because there are probably a lot of mediocre non-BIPOC who might be in those spaces. So I definitely deserve to be there as well. So I just try to remind myself of that. And anyone else who's feeling imposter syndrome in these spaces, just remind yourself, like, I deserve to be here. Just kind of say that over and over again. And then your second question was about, what was your second question? So there's imposter syndrome.
Yeah, just how you deal with social anxiety when when you find yourself being overwhelmed, and are there any techniques that you might want to share with individuals? Because again, I mean personally, especially for my sisters out there, Black women in this environmental space, you guys are leaned on so heavily,
Yeah.
and just now I feel like you're getting some of the outspoken credit that you deserved years ago, right? And so how do you kind of deal with that, one and foremost, but how do you deal with just the overall social anxiety?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, a lot of women, especially a lot of Black women, sometimes can fall into people pleasing. But I think just realizing you can't be everything for everybody. And that's why we need representation first and foremost, because that's why what I hate sometimes when the media tries to position particular people, even though there's so many people, there's a beautiful community. And the thing is, I started to realize, it's okay if someone maybe doesn't like me, because I can name 10 or 20 other Black women that they should be following. That's no excuse. Not liking me is not an excuse to not do this work and find out all the amazing Black women that are in this space. So I think taking away the power of, it's not even about my personality when I'm speaking about environmental justice, it's about raising awareness for the cause. So I would say anyone who is speaking about environmental justice in some way, just know, okay, this isn't really about me at all. This is about the community. And if you have some sort of platform, no matter how big or small, even if it's just presenting in your classroom, know, like, you know what, maybe I can help further environmental justice by using my platform in this way. So I think that really helps with my social anxiety when I realize, again, it's not about me, it's about the cause. And again, if someone doesn't like me, it doesn't matter because I have my family, I have my friends, I have all these things, and just try to navigate through this world with, grace and humility, and be open to feedback, especially from elders in this space, but also know you can't be everything for everybody. And this is definitely why we need representation. And yeah, just don't try to be someone that you're not, because I could fake it, I could do all these different things, but I don't want to, and nobody should have to fake it. So just be yourself. And I find I'm the most confident when I am being myself and I'm not pretending to be anybody else.
First and foremost, just thank you for just opening up and being so honest, about these issues. Oftentimes, these are things that people don't like to show or put out there. And so I just want to take a moment to just thank you for being so open with us. For those who are watching, who are interested in joining their own groups or launching their own organization, you're somebody who's done it successfully multiple times over. Do you have any advice in terms of how to go about doing such things, in terms of launching new things or joining groups, and how do you even pick what group is best for you? Because there's so many out there now and things of that nature.
Yeah, I guess what I could say is, I think in my career, like I've just tried a bunch of things because that's the best way that you can find out like what you like and what you don't like. So, I worked at the American Diabetes Association for 4 months, internship, National Park Ranger, just trying it out, working corporate sustainability at a soap company, so I would say it's important to dabble in different things, get a feel for different things, because then that will bring you closer to what you want to do. Sometimes I guess with the internet, it seems like there's that one moment, one post, virality, made it, but that's not how it goes. Like there's so many times, I can't tell you how many jobs that I've been rejected from. I was rejected to so many jobs from Patagonia, happened to get one after just applying, and it was a position that I didn't think I wanted, but I tried it out anyway. So I would say just knowing that there's a lot of failure, even if you start a club and maybe you only have 4 meetings and then maybe it kind of falls apart, but you can try again in another way. And I would just say to make sure that you're taking those lessons, those failures, taking all those lessons from those failures, because it's so important and can help you like strengthen whatever you want to do in the future. I would say before you start something, definitely like get involved with different things. Like, I went to like sunrise meetings, Surfrider meetings, different meetings like that, just to see how other people were organizing and what they were doing. And then, yeah, going from there. And then if you want to start something, I think sometimes people down talk social media at times, but right now it can be an incredible way to find community, especially because we're kind of in our homes. So definitely utilizing different communities, whether it's Clubhouse, which kind of scares me sometimes, but if it's Clubhouse or Instagram or TikTok, finding other people out there in the world, because you'd be surprised how many people are interested in the exact same thing that you're interested in, even if it's like a couple towns over. So yeah, definitely utilizing social media.
Awesome, thank you. I mean, speaking on the social media front, since we're there right now, tell us a little bit about how you were able to kind of use that vehicle to be almost, I guess, your main platform, or because social media right now it's it's really a vehicle that's being used to do all type of activism and advocate work and education. And, people are able to put different resources and materials up there. Do you see that being something that's continuing in the future? Do you see it changing when the pandemic happens? Like, kind of, what are your thoughts along that when it comes to organizing for environmental justice?
Yeah, I guess with intersectional environmentalists, like that platform, and then I can speak about my personal platform. I feel like it was working when educators were starting to use like our graphics and videos like in their lectures, which I thought was so cool. Or like I'm starting to see professors even use like TikToks where someone's talking about environmental justice. I'm like, we're on to something. So that makes me really happy. And I think, different organizations have different goals. For intersectional environmentalists, I could say specifically our goal is to, and it's not like we have a manifesto because that's kind of weird, but if we had a goal, it would be like to, I don't know, dismantle the current educational system and make sure that environmental justice history is a part of it in some way, and that climate justice issues are brought to the forefront. So that's really what our focus is just trying to find ways to create educational materials that teachers and professors or just individuals around the world can use that feel very accessible. And it's actually kind of challenging. Like those infographics take hours of research, getting fact check sources, and then finding ways to communicate it in a way that doesn't feel inaccessible. So yeah, that's what we're doing with that platform, just really trying to create those resources. And next week, our new website is launching, and we have something called the Resource Hub, which I'm really excited about because it's taken a long time. And then with my personal platform, Green Girl Leah, honestly, that's just been a vehicle in many ways to be able to fund the work that we're doing at IE. And like I talked about wealth distribution, I know that means different things to other people, but I do identify as a democratic socialist probably. So I totally believe in like taking some of that corporate greed and channeling it to grassroots organizing and whatnot. And honestly, all of the co-founders of intersectional environmentalists were unemployed, as were many people during the start of the pandemic. And through those corporate partnerships, that's been the easiest way during the pandemic to fund that work. And then also it's been a really cool way to have direct communication with some of these companies. Like it's been interesting finding ways to leverage those like social media partnerships to get a meeting with like higher ups at some of these companies and like just tell them what they need to be doing. So yeah, it's been a journey for sure.
So you mentioned, you're in the corporate sphere in terms of educating them and really trying your best to hold them accountable. You mentioned, being in the kind of municipality, school, curriculum sphere as well. For those who are, trying to find areas where they can have an impact, are there certain areas that you think, could really use somebody to step up and step into this realm and help educate? Is there an area you think is really lacking in representation that you want to emphasize today to encourage individuals to build, something like? What are kind of your thoughts in terms of what the next step is outside of some of the paths and areas in which you already occupy right now?
Yeah, I think there's so many different roles. Like, I mean, definitely need more representation in policy. I was really excited about, Corey Bush from St. Louis, from my hometown. So we need more people like Corey out there doing their thing, but also in a corporate setting, because I learned, bureaucracy and government moves pretty slowly. However, corporations have access to a tremendous amount of funding that doesn't have to go through all of the legal channels. So I think that's kind of another place that definitely needs more representation, because through one of our clients in the accountability program is Nike, which has been really interesting, like talking to them about, okay, how can you make reciprocal relationships where you're actually empowering the BIPOC that you choose to work with, and you're not just featuring them in a campaign? How can you make a year-long commitment to support these organizers and whatnot? So that's been really cool. And a corporation like that has a tremendous amount of funding, and they're open to maybe having more sustainable, materials and different things like that. So I think there's a lot of room for growth, kind of infiltrating. I know it's an interesting word choice, but kind of infiltrating some of these organizations that have a tremendous amount of funding, which in my opinion deserves to, because of the environmental damage that some of these corporations have caused. I think that funding should go to Black and Brown communities. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there as well.
Thank you. I think infiltrating is perfect in that context, if you ask me. Well, that's just so we want to open it up. I know we're getting to our last, 8 minutes or so. I want to open it up to some audience questions. But before we do, is there any last thing you want to kind of say before we get into the to the audience questions, because once we do that, unfortunately, we'll have to let you go. I know you're a busy person, but thank you again for spending time with us. If
Yeah,
not,
let's get
um,
in.
yep, I'm sorry.
I said, let's get into it. Yeah.
Audience members, feel free to the chat open. Throw some questions in the chat, and I will make sure I ask them to Green Girl Leah. While those are coming in, I'll pull up my questions that I have prepared. Just a kind of a fun one. What's your maybe, I guess, earliest memory of environmental issues, in terms of like you getting out there and you really finding your voice and your power as the woman that you like? What was the first time you're like, you know what, this is me, this is Green Girl Leah. I'm about this life, you know?
That's funny. I don't know. I feel like my family has kind of been about that life. Like I just posted a photo on my Instagram. They had me out there in the streets, like me and my sister, like at protests when we were like really little. So I found this little photo of us just like going out. But yeah, that was great growing up in a super like Afrocentric family that was like, no, your history. So I feel like that's always been a part of my life in some capacity. But for me personally, I don't know. I think it was honestly 2020 when I realized like, oh, maybe this is something that I could do. This is really cool. And I feel like I found my power in so many ways. Yeah, in 2020.
Questions are coming in. So how can environmental justice be incorporated into a climate action plan at schools?
So I guess, is this more so like for the way the university, well, I could answer it in different capacities, but I don't know if it's the way, yeah.
I'll give a little context so I actually know this individual. So this is from a school in Hanover, New Hampshire, and they're working on a climate action plan. And so I'm guessing, the context of the question is just what are some of the ways they can try to incorporate environmental justice in their plan to make sure it's discussed, and it could be something that could be knowledgeable, but also worked upon within their action program.
Yeah, and I guess is the action program like how the university will like externally address these issues or more so like with the curriculum?
It's a high school, so it's more, yeah. So it's more so, and I apologize if I'm wrong, but it's more so, from my understanding, of them trying to find ways to have an impact as students, and what are some of the things they can do as a school to really put the forefront of the climate action plan, and at the forefront, but while also incorporating environmental justice in that action plan.
Awesome. Well, that makes me super happy that that's even like a discussion. I wish I had that in high school.
Hmm.
But yeah, I would definitely say first researching the environmental injustices that might be happening in your community and raising awareness with some of the, teachers or the people who are developing this plan. So for example, when I was going to school in Orange County, which was an experience, it was a very wealthy community. However, just 20 minutes away, there were areas of food apartheid that didn't have access to, fresh produce. So I think investigating that, like in your surrounding communities, like are there areas of food apartheid, or are there areas that are close by me that might not have access to green spaces or might have higher instances of air pollution? I feel like that's a great place to start, just identifying places that might be in violation of like federal air quality standards, because I found that 71% of African Americans, this is like a 2001 EPA statistic, so I don't know if it's gotten better, but 71% of African Americans were living in communities that were in violation of federal air pollution standards, and the number is similar for Latinx communities as well. So I would do some deep diving into the surrounding communities, and then having that climate action plan address some of those things, because maybe, who knows, the high schoolers could have a community fridge or something like that, or help develop, something in their local community that would help.
Thank you. Just a couple more. Have you found storytelling useful to your work, like framing stories for corporations, asking people in impacted communities to kind of shape a story or your own story? Like, how has storytelling been useful for you?
Absolutely. I think so. When I am writing for different publications, and I think this is something that I hope more environmental people will be open to, but like I've written for platforms like Vogue. I even recently had an article in Playboy on environmental justice. And I really want this to go beyond just like academic papers. So I think persuasive writing is really important, and that storytelling is really important, especially when it's not in a specifically academic setting. So yeah, I've definitely found, sharing my story in the context of why maybe people should care about environmental justice when I'm talking to people who aren't familiar with it, it's extremely beneficial. And I think that's because we're human. We want to connect. We want to learn about each other's stories. But the other side of that is it's also been weird. I don't want my personal story to be a commodity in some ways. I don't want it to seem like, when I'm talking about Ferguson and the events that happen there and everything is just like sacred, and I don't, but it is a part of my story. So navigating how to share my story so it's coming from that real like human place, but also not exploiting my story, because sometimes it can feel like that, and I don't want to have to share my trauma to get people to care. But definitely, I think framing stories for corporations and talking about the communities that are being impacted, it's kind of hard to ignore, because when you talk about climate justice, for someone who's not familiar, it might seem very abstract. I don't know how many times I've had someone, even people with environmental training, say, well, the climate's not racist. Why are we talking about race? But when you tell them a story, or they hear from someone who is impacted by, Flint, or even the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina or natural disasters, it's kind of hard to ignore. So storytelling is so important for sure.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, again, you are just giving all the keys and hitting all the points. I'm gonna have to watch this myself when I'm done, so I can make sure I caught it. You know. Almost done. We got about another 6 minutes with you. So I want to try to squeeze in at least one more question, if not two, but definitely one. Do you have any notable experiences reaching out to people who may not have like the similar beliefs or values, and how do you think we can kind of bridge those divides? Or is it even, I would even ask, is it even necessary to do so when having that conversation?
Yeah, I think it depends, first and foremost. Like there are times when I feel like, I guess, educating other people, but I'm also like with people who want to be allies. Sometimes it's important for them to not burden Black folks like with doing the emotional labor for them. But however, I think one example, so I'm not particularly religious. I was religious studies minor. I think religion is really interesting. But I spoke at a somewhat conservative church in Orange County about climate justice, and very unlikely ally situation there, because some people in the church maybe didn't believe in climate change, but I saw it as an opportunity that there was a group of people who just really cared about racial justice, and they also saw the earth as one of God's creations, like in their belief system. So yeah, I thought that was a really interesting opportunity for me to learn and come speak at this church. And then I found a bunch of unlikely allies that I didn't expect, and that really blew my mind. And then yeah, I got to do a deep dive into all the different religions and different people who care about the planet and environmental justice because of their religious background. And they shouldn't have to be excluded. So I thought that was a really great way to do that. However, I think I've learned really quickly over time, like when people want to debate and when they're curious. So sometimes when people ask me questions, it's not because they actually want to learn. They're just like, well, why is the climate racist? And then I'm like, hey, here's a study on environmental justice. And then they say, well, it's economic. That's what I always get. People always will say, it's an economic issue, not a race issue. And I'm like, well, when you separate the data, in fact, it is a racial issue. But when people do that, I just know I'm not going to waste my emotional labor on anyone who's not genuinely curious and wants to provoke. So I think no one is obligated, especially no BIPOC, are obligated to. We don't exist solely for the purpose of educating non-BIPOC people. So just remember that.
Thank you. That's it's hard to remember that sometimes, especially when you're in this kind of work, just because you are leaned on so much, and you do want to try to have the biggest impact as possible. But like you said in the beginning, self-care is most important, right? Because you can continue to do the work you're doing if you're kind of burning yourself out. And I just want to thank you for spending time with us, for making time to us and for all the work that you do and the leadership that you provide. There are very few conversations that I have about, environmental justice or intersectional environmentalism where your name doesn't come up. And so, you're a true leader and a true pioneer in the sense of the word. And just thank you. Thank you for spending time with us, and thank you for what you continue to do.
Have a good day, everybody. I'll be listening in. See ya.
Thank you. And we'll go next to Ariel King.
All right. Well, thank you again so much, Leah, for sharing with us today. We are now going to have Christina come back up to introduce Greening Youth, the organization. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Ariel. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm here to introduce to you Ebony Preston from Greening Youth Foundation, and she's going to talk to you a little bit more about the work that they do.
Awesome. Uh-oh, I hope you can hear me. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. As Jamison said, that was so powerful. So thank you, Leah, for all of you and your work and your courage and the group that you're a part of. I'm going to take the next few minutes to talk about our work with Greening Youth Foundation, and I certainly encourage you all to follow up with me if you have questions or just want to figure out more ways to get involved. But with that, I'll go ahead and get started. As she said, my name is Ebony Preston. I serve as the Director of Operations for the Greening Youth Foundation, and we are a nonprofit that's based in Atlanta, Georgia, but we have programming throughout the US. I'll talk about that in a bit. But we were founded actually by a team of lawyers and an engineer about 14 years ago who said enough is enough. They were tired of being the only ones in the room that came with their perspective, and they never had mentors and things like that. And they really cared about the environment. And so they took that and formed the Greening Youth Foundation. We started with some environmental education and really saw that morph over the years, and we're very intentionally working to make sure that diverse youth and young adults have an opportunity to engage in conservation and more largely engage in careers in conservation. So really excited, like I said, to talk to you all about this work and encourage you to let me know if you have questions. So as I said, we have 4 major departments, our first being our Forever Green, how we got our start. And so we're really hoping to engage youth K through 12 and talk to them about the environment, talk to them about where their food comes from, talk to them about recycling and composting and clean air and pollution and what that looks like, with the hope that they take that information home and back to their communities and they grow up to be environmental stewards when they become older and are really championing these lessons that we talk about. It's also a conversation about eating healthy and knowing that those types of things and taking care of yourself are really, really important on a day-to-day, and again, hoping that they share that knowledge with their larger communities. We have our Youth Conservation Corps, which is our biggest department. This is for college-age students and recent graduates and graduate students alike who say, hey, I don't necessarily know what I'm going to do, or maybe you do know what you want to do, but I'm just looking for an opportunity. So we've worked with a laundry list of partners, from the National Park Service and the Forest Service to, even as Leah mentioned, Patagonia and the North Face and Colombia, some environmental NGOs, but a number of partners to, again, create those opportunities. And I have a robust staff who is there to mentor these young folks. It's not a matter of you go into this position and we leave you and you never hear from us again. We understand that there are barriers to success in this space. It's not something that's made up, that it's really hard to be successful here. And so we're making sure that we are a part of that matriculation through that program with you. We're there to help you in professional development and making sure that we create a resource for you and an opportunity for you so that you can be a leader if you choose to stay in that space or go on to something else. In 2014, we formed our Urban Youth Corps. This is a department that is near and dear to my heart. You see some young men there that are actually at a 3.5-acre farm that we have in Atlanta, but this is for young people who maybe don't take the traditional route, if you will, of going to a 2 or 4 year university, but we say, hey, you too have a place in this space and can be a leader. And so we're teaching them about urban agriculture. This program here was about tree care management, but we do horticulture and animal husbandry, and we talk about solar energy and wind energy and equip these young folks to be successful again in that space, and say, you don't have to have tens of thousands of dollars of student loan debt like I do, but that you can be successful just by virtue of being you and being committed to this work. So really, really excited about that program. And I welcome those, if you make a way down to Atlanta to visit the farm, we would love to have you there. And then finally, we have our international programs. Phenomenal work. Our CEO and founder and our chief strategy officer are actually in Nigeria right now, and that we have an office out there. We're also doing some work in Liberia. And then we're doing a program this summer that we're kicking off that's focused on students coming from historically Black colleges and universities, and sending you all out there for 6 months to work with an organization that's really focused on climate change. And so we're doing that work in the UK and also in South Africa. But I can definitely say that across all of these programs, we're really excited because we're able to do it our way. We're very intentional with our programming, with our outreach, with our partnerships, with our support, because we want to make a difference. Again, it's not easy work, and there's a reason that these organizations, or depending on which side of the conversation you're on, but conservation or the environmental justice movement, it looks the way that it has. So we're there to really shift that dynamic and that paradigm and make a big difference. And so just very largely what this has morphed into is 7 national programs. We've had more than 3,000 positions within those national programs. We also have hundreds of individual placements each year. Outside of our national program, we have about 500 internships from Alaska to Guam to Hawaii to New York to DC to Vermont, New Hampshire, what have you. So there's something for everyone. As I said before, we're working with federal partners and NGOs and different universities with a real focus on HBCUs, tribal colleges and universities, and Hispanic serving institutions. We're everywhere, and it's all about getting young people service and opportunity and access and uplifting your voice. So as I wrap up, when we first started talking about what Greening Youth Foundation could challenge folks to do, I was really excited about that. And I will say that as being a woman of color and considering myself an environmental steward and someone who's really into this conservation space, there's going to be a lot of intersectionality. And so just want to talk through these very quickly. So for the first part, becoming an environmental steward and saying it really is okay to start small, but just start. So understanding why composting is important or why recycling is important. Know that things, as Leah said, Katrina or Flint, while these are environmental issues, look at what the work of folks in New York were doing with We Act and why that matters so much. So there's a lot of lessons to learn in just that stewardship and things that you can do and be a part of. Next is getting involved. So as I said, Greening Youth Foundation, we have a job board, we have tons of positions, and there's literally everything under the sun to do. So from your accountants to your social media managers to interpretation to compliance to biologists to hydrologists to lawyers. As I said, we were founded by lawyers and engineers. There's something for everyone. If you say, hey, I know my path and I know what it is that I want to do, you can still give back with your time and volunteer. There's a number of organizations, especially in this nonprofit space, that need help, that need your voice, that need your energy and time. So reach out to those. I put board of directors here, join. I know sometimes we're intimidated by those spaces or those titles, or sometimes we're like, do I have the time? But it's so important. I know for me, I was intimidated by the space when I first got here, but I'll be open. You know, I joined a pretty big board when I was 27 years old. And they listened because I made them listen. And so I tell you, I know we talked about that imposter syndrome, that is a real thing. But what you have to say and the perspectives that you come with really matter. And it's important for you all to be role models in that space as you demand change. And then finally on that front, just get outside. I've listed some groups out there. Lee, I apologize. I'll make sure I put yours on my next presentation, but there's a lot of groups that are getting outdoors, that are doing the work, that are in conversation, that are sharing resources, a number of things. So I would say follow them, get to know them. This is a very, very, very short list. So I encourage you to do your research. Next is be in the know. Don't let you not knowing something be the reason that you don't act, or that you don't grow, or that you don't help someone. So stay current, be a lifelong learner. That's really, really important. Elevate more voices. We carry a lot of privilege, even the folks that are on this call today. You know, life wasn't always easy for me, but I do carry a privilege in that I am heard in a lot of spaces. And so sometimes we have to share that as we look to problem solving communities. Oftentimes the solution for the communities that we're looking to help are already there. So listen to people, really uplift them and give them the opportunity to make noise in the right way and it be authentic and personal. Next, I'll say don't settle. Sometimes things are handed to us. Sometimes we just have to take them. Again, you all are thought leaders and looking to do a lot of good in the world. And I want to say live in that moment and be excited about it and know that you bring a perspective that no one has ever had before, and you are different, and that is powerful, and that is great. So don't settle. Definitely work to move that needle and push the envelope. And then finally, give yourself some grace. We are finite resources, and perfection doesn't have to be the enemy of good. So self-care, as Leah said, is really, really important. I was a former social worker, so I will preach that more than I preach anything else on this list. But give yourself some time and some grace and know that you're doing amazing work. And folks like me and my organization, we really, really appreciate it. But in order to do all the other things that I mentioned before, you have to be present and aware and have that energy to do that. So do good, do well, be excited, be encouraged, because you all are amazing. And I thank you for even showing up and letting me chat. Jameson, I hope I did not go over my time, but again, I would love to continue the conversation if the opportunity presents itself. If you're interested in just chatting to learn more about our organization, that is my real cell phone number. So by all means, reach out. That's my email address that works as well. Greening Youth Foundation is all over social media. We have an amazing content manager in Yero. So follow the hashtag, follow the handle, and would love to talk with you more.
Thank you so much, Ebony. Amazing organization and tons of information that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, and now we will begin our next speaker for today. So we have Justin Onwenu. Justin is a fourth-generation Detroiter and environmental justice organizer for the Sierra Club. As a Detroit-based organizer, he fights for clean air and clean and affordable water and a just economy for all communities. This has included advocating for city ordinances that protect drinking water, securing funds for communities in need of air filtration systems, and working with local unions to fight for a just transition. Originally interested in medicine and public health, he became involved in addressing climate and environmental justice issues in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. In the hurricane's aftermath, and as a Rice University student body president, he helped organize thousands to respond and support some of Houston's hardest hit areas. After graduating, he led outreach efforts for the Children's Environmental Health Initiative, where he worked to uncover the long-term health, housing, and economic impacts of Hurricane Harvey on Texans. He currently serves on the inaugural Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice under the direction of Governor Gretchen Whitmer. He was also recently appointed to the Democratic National Committee's Environment and Climate Crisis Council Platform Committee, please try saying that 3 times fast, where he is one of 12 nationwide members responsible for helping develop recommendations for climate, environment, and energy plans for the 2020 Democratic Party platform. Justin, the floor is yours. And if anyone has questions throughout the panel, please feel free to add them to the chat and I will be sure to ask him at the end. Thank you so much.
Great, and thanks again so much for having me and for the kind introduction. As was mentioned, feel free to could drop in the chat. It sometimes is difficult to see questions, but please feel free to stop in the chat. Unmute yourself if necessary, if I'm going too fast. But thanks again for having me. I am Justin Onwenu. I'm an environmental justice organizer. As was mentioned, I'm based in Detroit, Michigan. And I like to start off talks just by giving thank you. There are a lot of organizations, people, mentors, elders who have been involved in the work locally, nationally. And a lot of the work that I'm going to be talking about is not just my work, it's collective work, it's work that a lot of other folks have been doing. So I want to put that at the end so I just don't skip over it at the end. I also want to start off just by sharing a little bit about my background and why I care about environmental justice. So I, from Michigan, was born in Detroit, but I spent a lot of my childhood down south in Alabama. And one of the first images of anything climate related that I can think of was Hurricane Katrina. And if you have taken a class on the environment or taken a class on sociology and race, then you'll recall images like the one you see on the left, which is essentially an image of folks in the historically African-American part of New Orleans seeking help. And a lot of folks were stranded on their rooftop, basically waiting for the government to respond, waiting for the government to do something about the floodwaters that were just rushing into communities. You'll also just remember images from that hurricane of the president at the time, flying over the wreckage, the city that was hit awfully hard by the hurricane. And the third image that you may remember is the sort of side-by-side image of white families trying to get help, trying to get supplies from in the aftermath of the storm. Side by side, Black families trying to get supplies and help and being labeled as looters. So, white families and Black folks doing the same thing, but the image being extremely different in the media. And so that was something I remember as a kid growing up, and something that has stuck in my mind since then, as we think about climate, as we think about environment, and as we think about race. The picture in the middle at the top is a picture, it may be kind of hard to see, but it says Dr. J.N. Onwenu, MD. So as was mentioned in my bio, I was interested in medicine for most of my life. So vast majority of my life I've been interested in medicine, addressing racial health disparities. Why do Black people suffer from asthma and diabetes and weird types of cancers at disproportionate rates compared to the overall population in America? These are the sorts of questions that I was asking myself when I entered school. The other thing that I remember entering school, so I went to school in Houston, Texas, and the picture at the bottom is actually a picture. One of the first things I saw arriving to Houston, there's an organization called TEJAS, the Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services. They do amazing work. They do tours around the Houston area. And one of the first things that I did when I got to Houston was go on one of their tours. And I remember seeing a home, that home is still occupied by a Houston police officer's family. It's been in the family for a long time. And the home is feet away, probably, my arm is pretty long, so probably within arm's length distance of a tank farm. So a facility that holds, some of the most toxic chemicals and materials in the world. And I remember thinking, okay, what's the health outcome going to be for, a family that's living in this home versus a family that's living not near a refinery or a toxic waste facility or a tank farm. But I kept that at the back of my mind. I started thinking about biology. So I came in as a biology and biochemistry major, ended up creating my major in international health and policy, but I was still taking all the pre-med classes, organic chemistry and biology. And so that was most of my college experience until my final year. In my final year, 2017, there was a hurricane that hit, Hurricane Harvey. That's the picture on the top right. Hurricane Harvey, $125 billion worth of damage, costliest storm in US history, side by side. It's tied with Katrina, depending on the estimates you look at. And I just remember not just images on TV and on social media and folks that I knew who were in the city, but I just remember the immediate aftermath of the storm. The university I was staying in was fine, was for the most part was not awfully damaged. But one of my jobs at the time was to serve as a liaison between students and administrators. And one of the things that we started to do after the storm was we started to notice a lot of the folks that that the university depends on to run. So cooks, custodians, librarians, just people, everyday people who live in the city and who come in the university to work were stranded or had to take care of their own families. And so we started, having students pitch in to help do some of that work. And then the next day we started noticing that people's homes were more damaged than we thought they would be, just based on the initial estimates of the storm. And so we started sending out people into the city to remove drywall from people's homes so the mold wouldn't spread. To go to shelters and religious centers and dog shelters, and just there was so much need from people's homes being flooded, cars being flooded, people being stranded, that we sent out a lot of people in the aftermath of the storm. And so from that point forward, I for the first time, started thinking about climate change. I started thinking about environment, and I started thinking about how health connects to environment. One of the things that came out of the hurricane was Superfund sites. So, plots of land that have been so contaminated that they need millions and millions of dollars for cleanup is essentially what a Superfund site is. Refineries. So Houston's the energy capital of the world, a lot of oil refineries, natural gas as well, toxic waste facilities, the sort of tank farms that you see in the picture in the middle. Those facilities, a lot of them did two things. Number one, a lot of them either stopped monitoring the levels of pollution that they were sending out into the community that they were located in. Or two, a lot of these facilities actually flooded. So they hadn't invested in the types of infrastructure that they needed to ensure the safety of the surrounding community. So there was a lot of toxic material that was just spread throughout the city. And so again, that final year, I went from, pre-med, planning on going to medical school, to being interested in climate and environment and the intersections with health. And so that's why, when I was graduating, I started work with the Hurricane Harvey Registry, which is a initiative that came out of the Children's Environmental Health Initiative. And the Children's Environmental Health Initiative, our goal was basically to try to uncover a lot of the disparities that came from the storm. And I won't go over this too long, but there were health effects that we could see from the hurricane. We asked people, thousands of people, what was your life like before the storm and what was it like after? And what sort of things could the city do better to make sure that you were safe, that you were secure the next time, a climate-driven superstorm like Hurricane Harvey hits? And from that experience, I went around to community centers, to churches, to door-to-door phone banking, just getting to know a lot of people throughout this region. And I could continue to see the disparities that we know are common. The racial disparities, the economic disparities. In particular, in some of the Hispanic and African-American neighborhoods in Houston, I met people who had mold in their home over a year after the storm. I met people who, had trouble navigating just the very confusing system to get help. And in some cases, the state government was slow to give help, money, resources to the communities that were in need as well. And so I think the important thing to think about with this is Hurricane Harvey was one storm, what I would call a climate-driven superstorm that the United States experienced that year or that season. There were also wildfires in the West Coast. There was a hurricane that hit Puerto Rico and South Florida. There were, weird weather events that hit the Midwest as well. And what's important to, again, remember is that each of these storms often compounds on the last storm that hit. And so Houston, for example, Texas had the winter storm grid shut down, essentially, where people were without water and electricity for days. But many people are still recovering from the storm that hit in 2017. And when I was there, for the 5-year span that I was there for school and then for work, there were 3 500-year storms in that 5-year period, 3 500-year storms in 5 years. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure that those estimates are actually accurate. So now I work for the Sierra Club. I moved back to Michigan, work for the Sierra Club. It's an old and large grassroots environmental organization that focuses on everything from public lands and conservation to retiring coal plants and transitioning to clean energy. The program that I am in advocates for environmental justice. And so I want to just spend a couple of seconds going over what environmental justice means. So environmental justice, the EPA will define it as basically the fair treatment of all people, regardless of background, when it comes to environmental laws, regulations, and policies. What's important to note about this definition is that development and implementation and enforcement are equally important. You can have a law that's developed that's not implemented properly. You can have a law that's developed and looks good on paper, but was not developed in an equitable way, and including the community, the very communities that are impacted by the laws and regulations that are being implemented. So development, implementation, and enforcement, equally important. There's a quotation that I really like from Professor or Dr. Robert Bullard, who's at Texas Southern University, is considered the father of the environmental justice movement. There are a lot of other great elders who said similar words, but I think the quotation is important. And the quote is that whether it's by conscious design or institutional neglect, communities of color essentially have been hit with some of the worst environmental devastation in the nation. I think this quotation is important because racism does not have to be consciously designed for it to impact people in a disparate manner, or for it to, or for implementation, or for the law itself to be racist. So neglect is also a form of discrimination, of racism. And I think that's important to note, because a lot of times when we talk about environmental justice, we're not just talking about communities that have been redlined next to industrial centers. We're also talking about the types of communities that have been disinvested in, that don't have grocery stores next to them, or because of the disinvestment, have been the prime locations where industry seeks to locate. So new industries seek to locate in communities that are poor, that are disadvantaged, oftentimes because the land is cheap, and because city governments oftentimes recruit these types of companies. So the conscious design or institutional neglect, I think, is the important part to remember of this quotation. So why does this matter? Why does environmental justice matter? So a couple of reasons. You know, if you live next to a polluted area, chances are your child is not going to learn. If you're learning in a polluted environment, rather, you're probably not going to be learning at the same rate. You're probably not going to be learning as well as you need to as a student that's learning in an environment that's healthy. If you're living right next to a polluting facility, chances are you're probably going to be spending more on healthcare for things like asthma, cancers, and other things that pop up because of the pollution. If you're living next to a refinery or hazardous waste facility, chances are your home value is not going to be what it would be otherwise. And home values, the value and the equity of your home is one of the ways wealth is generated and built in this country. And so these are all reasons. There are 1,000 other reasons why environmental justice is important. But I think what's important to note is that environmental justice and the environments people live in connect to so many other issues that people care about. You may be familiar with redlining, basically federal government authorizing basically banks and other financial institutions and directing where they put their investment and where they don't. And where Black people, where Hispanic people, where other groups were located were oftentimes designated or redlined to be areas where investment should not be directed. And so this map on the right is actually a map, a red line map of Detroit, 1940. The map on the left is actually a master plan of the city of Detroit dating 1951. And you can see essentially a lot of the red line areas. So along the riverfront, which is kind of at the bottom of the map, are areas that were both redlined. So a lot of these areas are where Black people located. There's a part of Detroit where I'm living now that was formerly known as Black Bottom. A lot of these areas were also zoned to be commercial or industrial areas. So we can see today a lot of the areas where a lot of the pollution is concentrated are the very same areas. This is another example, things you don't even think about. So formerly red line areas where Black people, historically have lived are hotter than the rest of a metropolitan area or the rest of the city. That's something you don't think about. as connects to tree cover, and where trees have been removed or where trees have been planted. So even things like how hot an area gets, and you don't even think about that when it comes to where children play. Are children allowed to go outside? Is it safe for people to go outside? When there are heat waves, are people safe? Heat waves are something that are incredibly tied to death in communities that aren't properly resourced and properly prepared. So things you don't even think about. And I do just want to say, a lot of you all are interested in law and policy. And I think what's important to note is there are a lot of different ways of pursuing environmental justice. Legal routes, so Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Title VI, and civil rights complaints. There are political avenues, so the creation of new environmental justice laws at a federal and at a state level. Local zoning laws, so oftentimes it's not even the federal government and state government that decides if someone lives next to a refinery or not. It's oftentimes local zoning boards. And what I call profits, so businesses making decisions about their public image, making decisions about business conditions. So a steel company having to deal with tariffs, for example. And so all of these different buckets interact with each other. And oftentimes the role of an organizer, of an activist, of someone who's interested in this work is to figure out how to pressure, how to leverage these different arms to seek environmental justice. So I do want to spend a couple of minutes just going over a couple of examples of what environmental justice looks like in Detroit, in the area that I work. The picture in the background you can see is a picture of a refinery. It is the only refinery in the state of Michigan. It's located in Detroit, located in what some researchers will say is the most polluted zip code in the state of Michigan. And the picture that you see now is basically shows you how close the recreation center, so the community gathering place where seniors have events, where children play, where trick-or-treating happens, the main gathering spot for the community is right across the street from the refinery. And the only thing that separates the refinery from the recreation center is a freeway. And you can imagine from diesel truck emissions that that's not healthy if you're trying to play soccer. Second example, another facility located actually in Dearborn. So Dearborn is home to the largest concentration of Arab Americans in the country. It's a place where immigrants have come from all over the world. And one of the schools that the community depends on to make sure that children are getting a good education is Salina Elementary School. It's located right across the street from a steel mill. This steel mill actually has been called by state regulators, and one of the reasons why this is known is there was a lawsuit where a lot of the internal emails from the environmental agency came out. And what the regulators at the state level called this company was the most egregious polluter in the state of Michigan. So this is a company that that exceeds lead and manganese, which are two neurotoxins, very dangerous for children, especially since it's so close to a school. Lead and manganese emissions, they've exceeded countless numbers of times. Particulate matter, which is very fine, oftentimes dust-like material that people in this community will see on their cars, like a film on your cars. These are the sorts of emissions and pollution and chemicals that people have to be burdened with. Located right next to a playground, right next to a school. Another example, there's a coalition of folks called the Coalition to Oppose the Expansion of U.S. Ecology, who've been battling in the city of Detroit and in Hamtramck to get the state not to approve any more permits for this company. This is a facility, it's called U.S. Ecology, but it is actually a hazardous waste facility that processes cyanide, PFAS, just the most toxic chemicals that you can imagine. Actually, in early 2020, the state approved a 9-fold increase in allowing this company to store and to process these toxic materials. Also located, again, in a Black community, in a community where immigrants locate. And there actually was a civil rights complaint that we're engaged in with a lot of other organizations trying to get the state to recognize that environmental racism is a civil rights issue as well and needs to be treated as such. And these again are all local examples. As I mentioned, this facility, the state approved a 9-fold increase in their storage and processing capacity. In the state of Michigan is one of the worst when it comes to environmental racism in terms of hazardous waste exposure. So Michigan is 25% minority, but 65% of those living next to hazardous waste facilities are communities of color. 25% of the state, but 65% of those who are living right next to hazardous waste facilities. Another example, you all are of course familiar with the Flint water crisis, but in Detroit and all across the state, there have been issues around water access. This is especially important at the beginning of the pandemic, when one of the top things that officials were telling people was wash your hands to protect yourself from the coronavirus. But a lot of people, because of poverty, because of a lack of investment at the state and federal level in water infrastructure, water has become more expensive. And so people have had trouble paying for water bills, for the rising water bills. So people have been shut off from water. And so there was a huge fight at the beginning of the pandemic, going on for decades actually, to turn on the water, to keep the water on, and ultimately to make it affordable. And there are groups like We the People of Detroit, who you can look up, who's doing great work on water access and water affordability. I think the thing to note with all these examples, and Leah mentioned this earlier, is that what we're dealing with is not just a couple of examples of environmental injustice. What we're dealing with is the cumulative impact of all of these forms of injustice on communities of color, on low-income communities. And this is a perfect example. Again, you're not just dealing with one facility, one steel mill, one refinery, one hazardous waste facility, a bunch of truck traffic. Oftentimes, what communities that have been historically redlined are dealing with is the concentration of all of these forms of injustice in their community. And so there's a term that the environmental justice movement called it cumulative impact, which basically means, again, that we're not just dealing with one facility in the neighborhood, but 20. And the way that our laws and regulations are set up is that we measure the impact of the facility one by one. So we look at one company and we say, you're only emitting 100 million pounds of pollution per year. Great, you're under the limit. You're allowed to pollute. We look at company 2, they're under the limit. Great job. Company 3, you're under the limit. Great job. But what we don't consider is that all of these companies may be located in the same area, within the same vicinity. And so if your home is located right in the middle of this mess, you're dealing with not just a company one by one, air pollution one by one, but you're dealing with the cumulative impact of all of this air pollution. And this is one of the issues in our laws and regulations. I'm looking at the time. I have about 6 more minutes, so I do want to be conscious with the time. But what I'll say is that people have been organizing, fighting against this injustice for a very long time. So protests, rallies, strategy sessions, dinner, enjoying each other's company, thinking of ways to fight back. And the example that I want to leave you all with that just gives you an idea of what organizing against environmental injustice looks like is also something that happened locally. So in late 2019, there was a plot of contaminated land, contaminated with uranium, PCBs, a lot of other nasty stuff, that collapsed into the Detroit River. So this is a drinking water source for Canadians. So the Detroit River separates Detroit from Windsor, Canada. And a week after the collapse happened, after this plot of land collapsed into the river, the Windsor Star, which is a Canadian newspaper, published this article, breaking news, uranium in the Detroit River. And so we sprung into action. So we asked, what is the threat to our drinking water? What do the people who are charged with protecting us know? What don't they know? What went wrong? And how can we make sure that our community is safe? So these were the questions. And these questions were asked on rapid response calls. So we basically set up a conference call, invited everyone we knew, invited elected officials, and grilled them. What don't you know? What do you know? And what are you doing to make sure that everyone is safe? We held a town hall. So days later, We brought together lawmakers from Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib to local state representatives and state senators. Canadian member of parliament was involved. We brought together organizations who are committed to racial justice and environmental justice. And we said, what do we know? What went wrong? And what are the solutions to make sure that this never happens again? So that's where a lot of lawyers and policy experts came into play. We had lawyers look at the gaps in our law that allowed a company that was not permitted to operate along the river to basically be so negligent that a site contaminated with uranium collapsed into our drinking water source. So we had lawyers looking at the law to identify gaps. And this was the result. Days after this happened, or days after we were aware, about a week, I want to say 6 days maybe, hundreds of people showed up. Community residents faced off against members of Congress, the Coast Guard, the governor's office, the mayor's office, and we said, what are you all doing to make sure this doesn't happen again? And not only did we come with that energy, but we had a list of solutions. So we divided on a local level, on a state level, on the federal level, the things that each office holder could be doing to protect our drinking water sources, to strengthen our emergency management protocols and procedures. And so that preparation resulted in fines that the company had to pay, resulted in the state government taking these issues more seriously. And we're currently working to pass the Detroit River Protection Ordinance, which is an ordinance that we're hoping is going to shore up a lot of these gaps. So I do want to just say in the final 2 minutes that I have before questions that a couple of challenges and opportunities. So number one is, I think conceptually there needs to be a shift from communities having to prove that they've been harmed, that what they're saying is true, that everyone on my block has cancer. I know it's because of the pollution. Why won't the state do something? So there needs to be a shift from communities having to bear the burden and share their stories to companies having to prove that they are safe, that what they're producing is safe, that what they're polluting is safe. And if it's not, they shouldn't be allowed to do what they're doing. Number two is that I'll just say that cumulative impact is something that I mentioned. Also mentioned that when states hold companies accountable, things as simple as where the fine money goes. Oftentimes, when a company is fined for polluting, the money goes to the general fund to be spent on tax breaks or whatever. A lot of that money needs to be directed back to the communities that have been harmed. And the last thing I'll say is that one of the challenges is that companies locate and are allowed to operate and pollute and harm communities and the public health of the communities they operate in, oftentimes because land is cheap. And again, I mentioned redlining is one of the reasons why that is, and where they don't face political backlash. And so that equation is something that needs to be addressed. Companies are looking for cheap land where the people are not valued, where people's voices are not valued, and where they are allowed to do what they want to do politically. So those are a couple of challenges and opportunities. I don't want to leave on a bad note. So a couple of things on how we should think about, how we should talk about, and how we should fight for environmental justice. I like the quotation, none of us are free until all of us are free. I think there's a huge opportunity for us to think intersectionally, as Leah reminds us, and to think about not buying into false choices on I want this facility in your backyard because it shouldn't be in mine. There are opportunities for us to build solidarity and coalitions with others. So thinking in a big tent manner is something that I challenge you all to think about when you think about environmental justice. How we should talk about it. There are a lot of folks that are going to talk about individual action. I think it's important for us to think systemically about mass action and movement building. So thinking big. And then lastly, how we should fight environmental justice. So be inclusive, let people speak for themselves, empower others, speak from your own experiences. There's a list of principles that I encourage you to look up. The Jemez and environmental justice principles are guiding lights for people who are interested in doing this work. And then here's a list of books, resources, things to look up if you want to take a screenshot of that. And then my contact info, my email, my number. This is the same number my mom uses, so feel free to call call me or email me if you have any questions or want to stay in touch. And I think my social media was put in the chat. So look forward to keeping in touch, and thank you again so much for having me. I'm happy to answer any questions you all have.
Thank you so much, Justin. This has been so informative and so helpful. So first, thank you for acknowledging that incredible Fannie Lou Hamer quote. It's one of my favorites as well. You talked a lot about accountability and how that comes from government and industry. And you also just mentioned the dichotomy of like communities trying to like advocate for themselves and not being able to, and like continuing to be polluted on. And so I just wanted to also share another resource for people to kind of understand what that looks like. It's a essay called "Which Came First, People or Pollution?" It's by Paul Mohai and Robin Saha. And I will add that to the chat just because it's a really good way to conceptualize what's going on in that situation. And so you also mentioned that you saw a need when you were in college and you began taking action. So what was the first step for doing that? And how would you encourage students who also see issues that need addressing to transform their concern into action?
Yeah, so for me, the provost of Rice University at the time, Mary Lynn Miranda, Dr. Mary Lynn Miranda, who actually was a professor at Duke and then University of Michigan and then went down south. She offered me a job leading into graduation, then on graduation day, to continue doing work around the hurricane. And that was my experience. I was still, informing family on graduation day. I'm not planning on going into the medical field. And so it just so happened that, a professor that I had worked with previously had an opportunity. So I would encourage folks to lean on your professors. They are experts. Professors who are doing this work oftentimes have amazing community ties. Some universities certainly need to do better about making sure that they're working with the community in a good way. But a lot of professors are really rooted in community. And so I would encourage you to talk to your professors who are in this field. I also would just say, if you're not thinking about this in a school setting, that a lot of this work is happening in rooms that are very accessible, or that are very public, I should say, maybe not accessible.
Yeah.
I mean that decisions about whether a facility is allowed to even locate near a home, whether a plot of land is zoned as industrial or residential, those happen in subcommittee of public health subcommittee, zoning subcommittee. So a lot of these meetings are obscure, they're a bore to go to, but they're important. And so if you can get involved with organizations like Sunrise Movement, Sierra Club, a lot of other great organizations who are doing this work, they can direct you to the rooms that you need to be in where a lot of this work is happening. So.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience. Terry asks, what are your thoughts on reparations, and how could we transfer that into an environmental justice issue? Leah touched on a bit on infiltrating corporations, but that's an area that she's particularly interested in because of the cumulative and intersectional issues. So if you have any thoughts on how we can translate reparations into an environmental justice issue, we would love to hear that.
Yeah, one of the things I tell people is that the environmental justice movement is, especially in a legal context, is more closely aligned with cases around housing discrimination and education and segregation, the civil rights movement. It's more aligned with those things than it is the conservation movement. And so that's an interesting question, because I think that right now you're hearing a lot of conversation around environment and jobs, environment and racism, environment and investment. And I think all those things are really important. The Biden administration was pushed by a lot of environmental justice activists to not just talk about green jobs and green investment, but to make sure that that money was being directly and narrowly targeted to communities that have been disinvested in. So I think that is certainly something that's a part of the conversation. I think right now their commitment is 40% of those types of investments are supposed to be directed to environmental justice communities. Certainly think, you know, it could be higher. But I think that's the way we have to talk about this issue, to make sure that Black communities, Hispanic communities, a lot of rural communities that have been disinvested in for such a long time, see us talking about the environment in a way that's not just, okay, conservation, you know, save the polar bears, important, but so that people see that we're also talking about direct community investment. So I think that's something that's really important.
Thank you. You defined environmental justice beautifully, and thank you so much for lifting up Robert Bullard. So you also mentioned the Biden administration. So I have a question. With this new presidential administration prioritizing environmental justice, what would be on your environmental justice wish list to see over the next 4 years?
Yeah, I think a couple of things come to mind. The first is I mentioned cumulative impact analysis, and basically saying that we can't just regulate companies for compliance. We have to regulate companies to make sure that they're actually safe for the communities that they're located in. So there's a lot of work around the cumulative impact of air pollution that I think can be done through the EPA, that can be done through executive orders that I hope the Biden administration will be taking up. They also have put a lot of that on their platform. We still have to see and make sure that they're using as much of their executive authority as possible and getting that done. The second thing I would say I mentioned before is investment in communities. So all this, the talk around green jobs and green energy future, that investment needs to be directed into the very communities that are going to be losing jobs or opportunities or investments. So that's the second thing. Third thing I would say on my bucket list has to do with water infrastructure, whether it's, you know, lead pipes or water shutoffs, or just the rising cost of accessing water. A lot of that is being driven by the fact that the federal government hasn't invested in water infrastructure for a very long time. Most of the costs has historically been borne by the federal government, but you know, they've just not been investing the way that they should. And we're seeing the real cost of that in communities, certainly in Michigan, but around the country. So I think investing in water infrastructure, making sure that no one's being shut off, that water is a human right, that clean air is a human right. Those are the things on the top of my bucket list.
Thank you. So we have about 1 minute. So I will ask one more question and see if we can get it done quickly. What advice do you have for students who are interested in environmental justice and want to participate, but might not have groups at their schools? The same question that we asked Leah.
Right. So I would, a couple of things. Number one, I mentioned lean on your professors. To lean on, and I say lean on not to mean like be a burden, but lean on, ask for advice, talk to, offer resources. If you have a skill that can be used, if you're good at you know, geospatial analysis or you know, doing interviews, you can offer those resources to community groups that may need them. So work in collaboration with your professors, community groups. There are a lot of groups that are sprouting up, certainly Sunrise, Sierra Club. And then I also would just say, you know, do the work, do the reading, do the listening that you need to become familiar with this issue, but also just talk to people. And the last thing I'll say is look in places. People may not have a sign that says I'm interested in environmental justice, but people may be concerned about education and the environments where students are learning. And so people may be concerned about pollution in schools. People may care about, you know, Black Lives Matter and racism in our economy, in our society. And so that may be an area where you're finding people who are interested in environmental justice. So be willing to talk to people who may not be environmental studies majors, who are certainly interested in climate and environment, but who may be more aligned with racial justice or economic injustice work. So be creative about that as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Justin, for sharing with us today and being willing to participate in today's presentation. It really means a lot to us.
Thanks for having me.
So thank you. Now we will turn it over to another Environmental Justice Law Society member, Christine, and she is going to introduce the next organization.
Thanks, Ariel. I would like to take this moment to introduce Alexandria Tiller Gates. She's from Her Healing, and she's going to lead us through some self-healing processes right now and tell us a little bit more about her organization.
Thank you so much, Christine. I'm so happy to be here. So I'm really excited that you all have invited me into this space. I am a marriage and family therapist and the founder of Her Healing, which is a private practice in Los Angeles, California, and the founder of the nonprofit Her Healing Community. And through our nonprofit, we provide monthly healing sessions to women of color. Since COVID, we have broadened our reach, and so we are providing our healing sessions virtually. So I am very, very passionate about the work that I do, and I can I can empathize with the work that you all are doing. So I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be here. There is a word that I want to bring up, and I'm not sure if you all are familiar with this word, but it's compassion, or this term, it's compassion fatigue. So just as I was listening to you all speak in this space, it is very clear to me that there is a lot of passion that you have for the work that you do, and a lot of compassion for the people you're serving. And so when we think of this term, compassion fatigue, it describes the physical, emotional, and psychological impact of helping others through experiences of stress and or trauma. So when we are experiencing compassion fatigue, our triggers and work experiences begin to affect our thoughts, our mood, and our well-being outside of work. So I just want you to pause for a second and just reflect and think, is this something that I have experienced in the past or something that I am experiencing now? And it is so common for those of us who serve others, whether that's in a healing capacity or a helping capacity. So if you can identify with that term and you believe it's something that you have experienced or are currently experiencing, it's important to remember that the best thing you can do for compassion fatigue is rest and self-care. And when I say self-care, I mean taking care of yourself. So Ms. Thomas, she spoke a little earlier today, and I just got so excited when I heard her say, we deserve to rest and to be happy too. And so often our focus is on those outside of us, right? But when we only focus on those outside of us and lose track of ourselves internally, then we are not presenting as our best selves. So I want to shift the focus to doing a guided meditation. And in that guided meditation, I want us to focus on self-compassion. So compassion towards ourselves and our experiences for the work that we do. So we need the self-compassion to acknowledge all the work that we are doing, have done, and will continue to do for our communities. So take a moment, just, wherever you are in your space, and you could sit, you can lay down, you can close your eyes, you can shift your focus downward with your eyes so that way you're not distracted with anything else going around you. Or you can just, again, stare at something in front of you. So you have options to do whatever feels comfortable for you in this moment. I want to encourage you to notice your breath. So take a moment and notice your inhale and your exhale. And just notice what it feels like to breathe. Notice what the air feels like to go in through your nose and out through your mouth. And you don't need to change your breathing. There's no perfect way to breathe. Just notice how you're breathing. And if at any point thoughts begin to flood into your mind, that's okay. It's natural for us to think. Just notice your thoughts with compassion. So don't judge them. Don't judge your experience in this moment. Just notice your thoughts. Notice any emotions that may come up for you. And with these emotions, just notice them. And then I want you to think of a challenge that you have recently experienced or one that you are currently having. So any challenge that's going on in your life. And I want you to notice the emotions or emotion that comes up for you with regards to this challenge. And as you notice these emotions, I want you to scan your body from the soles of your feet, slowly scanning all the way up to the top, the crown of your head. And I want you to notice where you feel those emotions the strongest. Where do you feel any sensations or tension? Where do you feel those emotions that are related to this challenge in your body physically? And wherever you feel them, just notice them. Just notice the sensations that you feel in your body with regards to these emotions without trying to judge them or change them. And I want you to take a moment to put a hand, so one of your hands over that body part where you feel that emotion or emotions the strongest in your body. And I want you to intentionally breathe to that area. So when you inhale, breathe to that area of your body. And then exhale and release it. When you inhale, breathe in compassion towards that experience, that sensation, those emotions. And then when you exhale, release it. And I want you to quietly repeat these phrases to yourself. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I live with ease. May I be at peace. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I live with ease. May I be at peace. And if there's any other phrase that you want to add on to that you feel like personally you need in this moment or this week or this month, feel free to add it. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I live with ease. May I be at peace. And when you're ready, I want you to take 3 cleansing breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. And afterwards, you can slowly open your eyes or come back to this present moment. I want you all to remember that it's okay to rest because you aren't doing this work alone. What I have learned being a part of this community today is that you have an entire community supporting you and working alongside you. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Alexandra. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for her healing. Thank you for you. Greatly appreciate you spending time and allowing us to lead us through this amazing session. We just felt it was extremely important to have this for the reasons that we named. And we are grateful to have an expert like yourself to be able to deliver that for us. And so, you know, it means a lot coming from a woman of color who's doing amazing things with her work. And so we will support you in any way that we can. And, you know, just again, thank you for all that you do. And thank you for spending time with us today.
Yeah, I admire the work that you all are doing, and just wanted to remind you that you need that love and self-compassion as much as you give it to others.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Barry, just a quick another 5 seconds to kind of find yourself. You know, I gave myself goosebumps when she told me to scan my body from my toes to the crown of my head. So if you did, shake it out. We have just about an hour left of our event. We have 2 more amazing speakers, and I will move on to the next one. It gives me a great honor, pleasure to humbly introduce to you Wawa Gaitherut, who is an environmental justice advocate, a writer, and current graduate student at the University of Oxford. She's a first-generation American of Kenyan descent and the first Black person in history to receive the Rhodes, the Truman, and the Udall scholarships. As an intersectional environmentalist, Wawa is motivated to uplift the voices of those most adversely impacted by environmental inequities through changing conservative conversations. Conservation conversations. For her work in collaboration with other activists and thought leaders, Wawa has been recognized as a 2020 Young Futurist by The Root, 2020 Grist 50 Fixture, a 2020 Glamour College Woman of the Year, has spoken on her work across the country, and I will add across the globe. Without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Wawa Gaitherut.
Hi, friends.
Hello.
I am so honored to be here. I have been here listening to the knowledge that has been passed on from everyone that has had the opportunity to speak. And I just feel so honored to be able to share this virtual stage and to be in community with people from all over the country and all over the world that are building community, even virtually, especially in a time where I think building community and experiencing the love like we were just talking about is most important. So first, I just want to thank the Vermont Law School's Environmental Justice Law Society. Y'all are doing such incredible work. Thank you for putting in the energy and emotional labor of putting on such a multi-dimensional event like this and bringing together so many incredible people and thought leaders. And it's really, really inspiring to see. And also thank you for the sponsors. Yeah, this is really, really exciting. So to begin, I always start any talk that I give by reintroducing myself. My name is Wanjiko Gaitherut, friends call me Wawa. And before any accolade or title, I am and will always be a daughter, a sister, a partner, a friend, and a proud Black woman. Now, I don't say this to undermine any accomplishment or success that usually comes before in a bio, or even as a practice of humility. Well, I think humility is a very important virtue. Rather, I say this to define what success means to me and how I measure success in answering the question that I pose to answer and talk about in this 30-minute conversation that we're having. And that question is, what must our generation do? What must youth do to do the work to ensure a truly just climate future? Right now, in this moment, we're experiencing the greatest existential threat that this world has ever seen, the climate crisis. And it's an existential threat because it calls into question everything that we believe, the institutions that we rely on, the politicians we've put our trust into, and the very possibility of prosperous, inhabitable futures. It also calls on us to point and name the things that truly matter. Now, if we can agree that success means preserving the valuable things in our lives that preserve our physical, emotional, and social well-being, then solving the climate crisis must start there, in our backyards and in our relationships. In other words, I believe it starts with rehearsing revolution in our everyday lives. So I got the idea for this talk from reading the labor drama Experiment and Radical Activism in the Early 20th Century by Mary McCoy. I had to read this, I think, sophomore and junior year. And in this book, Dr. McCoy tells the story of labor colleges that emerged between the world wars, schools that were funded by unions that sought to provide members with adult education, while also indoctrinating them into the cause. In the book, she discusses how the colleges used left-leaning drama programs to prepare students for on-the-ground activism emerging across the country. In fact, he argues that these amateur stages served as training grounds for radical social activism in early 20th century America. Now, what if I told you that we can replicate these dynamics in our everyday life? That the radical social activism that we need as youth to solve the climate crisis can be rehearsed in the stage that is our lives and the relationships that we find ourselves in. I am a firm believer that you can and that we all can, and here's why. The great Audre Lorde, who I will continue to reference in this talk frequently, and in my everyday life I do this, Audre Lorde once said, sometimes we are blessed with being able to choose the time and the arena and the manner of our revolution, but more usually, we must do battle where we are standing. It is this truth that grounds the 4 steps that I believe that our generation must take to rehearse revolution in our lives. Steps that our generation must take to ensure that we're facilitating a just climate future. But before I do that, it's important that I define what I mean when I say a truly just climate future in the first place. So I always refer to the National Climate Platform, which says that a just climate future advances the goals of economic, racial, climate, and environmental justice to improve the public health and well-being of all communities while tackling the climate crisis. It means ensuring the following: a healthy climate and air quality for all, access to reliable, affordable, and sustainable electricity, water, and transportation for every community, an inclusive, just, and pollution-free energy economy with high-quality jobs, safe, healthy communities and infrastructure. And it also means dismantling systems of oppression that contradict the development of healthy, safe communities. Right now, humans are at a crucial turning point to define bold and equitable climate solutions that address the legacy of environmental racism, while also building the US economy in ways that work for everyone, not just the wealthy few. And in doing so, we can imagine a new environmental and social landscape that is inhabitable for all of us. So how do we get there? How do we rehearse the revolution in our everyday lives? So I believe that the first step, and before actually I get into talking about these 4 steps, it's really important for me to say that the 4 steps that I've outlined here are things and lessons that I've inherited from my family, my community, and the leaders that came before us. So to me, the first step in rehearsing revolution in our everyday lives is to fall in love with the possibilities. So Mary Annalise Hegler, who is a badass Black climate justice essayist and podcaster, and overall just badass in general, she actually once said in a tweet, the thing about climate is that you can either be overwhelmed by the complexity of the problems or fall in love with the creativity of the solutions. However, I think in order to get to a point to fall in love with the creativity of the solutions, we have to first reframe the issue of climate change entirely. I learned how to do this. I learned how to discover my climate story in my own backyard. So a little bit about me. I grew up feeling very wedged between two histories. So in school, I learned that the Black agricultural experience was one of purely of subjugation, riddled by centuries of slavery, sharecropping, and exhaustive land practices. But at home, I knew that that wasn't the only story. In fact, I knew another part of the story of the Black agricultural experience. So according to oral history, my family has always been farmers, spending the southern sides of Mount Kenya with centuries of ancestral knowledge embedded in our DNA. When my mom first immigrated to the States, she found home in this history, where she tended to an overgrown lot in our backyard. He spent weeks hovered over that plot, transforming that weedy allotment into this fertile garden of familiarity. And I too found belonging in this act of love and spent my earliest summers elbows deep in the cool soil. And I would just watch in awe and probably was annoying her simultaneously as she would, pluck these fresh tomatoes by the bucket and almost seemingly transform them into steaming pots of Kenyan food that I grew up on. And it was in those experiences where I had my first contact with the physical environment. It was through food, through love. And through that, my first interaction with the physical environment was one of love. But the thing is I didn't always see it that way. Plainly put, growing up, I never saw myself as an environmentalist. Environmentalism was always presented to me as this top shelf issue, something that seemed too big, too white, too out there to include me, let alone my gardening practices as a kid. It wasn't until actually my junior year of high school where I involuntarily took an environmental science class that I had my aha moment of environmental proximity. It was in learning about environmental justice, particularly. It was actually a TED Talk that I watched by Peggy Shepard. And I actually had the opportunity to interview her this summer, which was a huge, roundabout circle life moment. And it was learning environmental justice from her and doing deep diving into the work of environmental justice afterwards that I understood the way environmentalism should go hand in hand with social justice, healthy, culturally competent food, and the livelihoods of Black and Brown communities. It was in this recognition that I unlocked the possibilities of what a just climate future must look like. I realized that in order for racial and gender justice to become a widespread reality, we need a climate future that prioritizes these things. As a student, I quickly became inspired by Black and Brown environmental justice scholars like Laura Polito and Dr. Robert Bullard. And with this new lens, began to challenge the traditional definition of toxicity to include systems that contradict the development of healthy, sustainable communities. And while I understandably felt challenged by the complexities ahead, it's precisely these discomforts that have revealed the crucial nature of my participation in this movement and in the creative possibilities that can blossom in a new just future. My family's history taught me the importance of framing and reimagining food production as regenerative and expanding a story beyond the one-sided one that we were taught in school. And it's in this reframing that I believe that we can unlock the door to fall in love with the possibilities of a climate future. I always ask people, because I often talk about intersectional environmentalism, environmental justice with audiences that may not be as involved in the issue as many of the folks here, but I always say, think about the causes that you care about. Is it education, prison abolition, gender and economic justice? If you were to close your eyes and describe what a just climate future would be, wouldn't you include those things there? So why shouldn't we? Our generation must reframe this movement, this climate justice movement, to be one that is vested in justice for all of us, especially those of us that have been traditionally left out of these conversations. This leads me into the second step. And I believe that the second step to rehearse revolution in our lives is to feel. all of our emotions, especially the ones that we feel ashamed about. So when it comes to existential threats like climate change, hope is often propped up as the sole emotional driver of action. At the end of nearly every climate panel I'm on, I'm asked, what gives you hope? Which is a question that, after a lot of thought, I think is asked because it's meant to inspire the audience to act on said hope. But I believe that hope is only a part of the equation, and that in the overt prioritization of hope, we're often missing out on the other emotions that come up when we get real about climate change. And in order for us to get honest about climate change, we have to be real with ourselves. So let me explain how I came to that. So a couple of years ago, I was invited to my first speaking engagement. They flew me out. I was really excited, and I wrote the talk about a week before, and I just could not get anything down. And I realized that I didn't know how to talk about climate change, but I had already accepted the talking, the speak inquiry. So I was like, well, I need to do something about this. And that might sound strange coming from me in this context for a number of reasons. One, I'm up here, and again, I have this opportunity to talk about environmental justice and organizing. And two, because even by then, I was already an environmental justice advocate. I've been working at that point for about 4 years on environmental justice, and I'd already spoken about that work. And yet, through all that screening, all that interviewing, and all this education, even in majoring in environmental studies as an undergrad, now being in grad school doing this work, I realized that I didn't have the tools to properly talk about climate change, the way that it feels, and the emotions that it awakens. Now, don't get me wrong, my education has not been in vain. In fact, I'd say that my education has been an enabler and tool. It's granted me some language, climate fluency, and the tools needed to communicate this information to broader audiences. It's even provided me access to spaces like this. But I've also been able to reflect on what it hasn't provided me with. So I was a STEM student as an undergrad, and in STEM, emotions are avoided like the plague. We're told that climate science is purely objective and that emotions provide leeway for credibility gaps. But the thing is, that's not true. Climate change and emotion are not only compatible, they're inseparable. Because climate change is anything but technical, it's inherently emotional. It's a story of loss and despair, but it's also a story of hope. And I think that we have the obligation to tell the whole truth, because like Mariana Elise Hegler says, we're not just trying to educate people anymore, we're trying to activate them. And to do that, we need an environmental movement that allows people to relate to climate change in its emotional entirety. Audre Lorde once said, I find I am constantly being encouraged to pluck out one aspect of myself and present this as the meaningful whole, eclipsing or denying the other parts of myself. Not being honest about the way climate change makes us feel denies the parts of ourselves that can be the most integral ingredients for action. If I'm being honest with you, climate change makes me pissed. I think about it all the time. I am angry that 100 companies have contributed to 71% of the world's greenhouse gases. I'm disappointed by the governments that have subsidized the fossil fuel industry, and I'm terrified of current and future climate disasters that will continue to hurt the most vulnerable around the world. And honestly, I'm also pissed that my future isn't certain. And most of the time, I'm angry because all these things pose a threat to the things and the people that I love the most. We need a movement that validates all of these feelings that all of us have about climate change, including the ones that we may feel ashamed about, the anger, the frustration, the hopelessness. And we need to, because we can't maintain a movement that doesn't tell the whole truth. It's wrong. And we certainly can't maintain a movement that fails to validate the very things that mobilizes us in the first place, which often are those emotions. So, because the things about these emotions is that they're actually not this dead end. They're actually an entryway to passion and sustainable action. And that's because the common denominator of all of those emotions, the frustration, the anger, the hopelessness, the common denominator of all those things often is love. And what's exciting is that love that spouts action and community resilience is not a new concept. It's a part of our inheritance, which leads me to my third step of rehearsing revolution in our lives, and that is recognizing the fights that we're inheriting and continuing. When it comes to an issue with the scale and scope as massive as climate change, it's easy to feel disoriented by the weight of the problem because it's overwhelming, and it should feel overwhelming. But the good thing is that the weight of all these problems is not a weight that we have to bear alone. It's something that is the responsibility of all of us. And the fight for a just climate future is connected to every social movement that has come before us, because climate change is not the first existential threat that we have had to experience. People have had to fight for their futures before. And when we think about trying to facilitate a language of a just climate future and how to bring people together, how to organize, it's really important to understand that the language that we're looking for, the words of progress and achieving the success of a just climate future, all of these words, this language that we're looking for, it exists. And it's been left behind for us by the great social movement leaders that have come before us and the great social movement leaders that are still with us. The words of Audre Lorde, Dr. King, Toni Morrison, and so many more that knew what it meant to fight and persevere even when the future wasn't certain. And I think that it's our responsibility as youth, as climate organizers, to rediscover their voices and be reminded that we don't want to return to precedented times. Instead, we want unprecedented care for our people and our planet. And finally, the last step, I think, is to practice revolution everywhere. So in the tradition of leaning on the wisdom of those who come before us, I will again cite Audre Lorde. And Audre Lorde once said, revolution is not a one-time event. When it comes to practicing revolution everywhere, we must get comfortable making the incremental steps we need to get there. And luckily for us, practice is nothing new. Think back to the time you learned something difficult, like riding a bike or learning to swim. It felt impossible at the beginning, like an insurmountable hill. But you practiced, you made mistakes, you fell down a couple times, and you picked yourself back up. Each incremental moment of practice made the goal feel less impossible. And over time, it's hard to comprehend not knowing how to do said thing. I think the same is required for revolution. If we're not practicing revolution in our everyday lives, will we ever be equipped to do so in real time? This is especially true with our organizing spaces. The environments of our organizing spaces is really important to meditate on, because if we're fighting for a just climate future, if we're fighting for justice in general, then the spaces that we come together must embody the justice we say we want to achieve. Is everyone being heard and taken seriously? Are opportunities being distributed equally? Are we getting real about uplifting the most vulnerable? And are we actually passing the mic when we need to? Are we dismantling notions of saviorism, celebrity status that are often co-opted by industry? And are we remembering Toni Morrison's words when she told us to remember that our real job is that if we're free, we are to free someone else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower someone else. This is not just a grab bag candy game. Now, if there's anything that I've learned from the never-ending trauma of the past year, it's this. It's that there's always an opportunity to reshape the way that we learn and use our time. Hoda Kibiti, who's one of my favorite thought leaders, wrote about hope, and I refer to it often. She said that hope is a discipline, so too is where we place our hope. This is incredible, truly magical, radical work that is happening around the world. And we should all be grounding ourselves in the movements we are inheriting, building, and passing on globally. And I think a lot of y'all can agree with me when I say that a lot of us, particularly youth, I'm a Gen Zer, we've never seen a perfect world, and arguably I don't think any generation has. Many of us grew up on the heels of 9/11. We learned our ABCs against the backdrop of Hurricane Katrina. We watched our parents and loved ones fight to stay afloat during the 2008 financial crisis and the financial crisis that we're experiencing right now. And many of us are the first in our families to be in this country, the first to attend college. And many of us have had to fight tooth and nail to find, to be able to navigate institutions of higher education to begin with, especially those that haven't always felt like home. Yet in the midst of what often feels like a generational free fall, there's always been a truth that has remained constant. While we've never known a perfect world, we've never needed the guarantee of success to try to strive for it. Dr. King once said, "I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality." And it's with these words that I believe that Dr. King left us a fundamental challenge, the challenge to lead and organize with deep love, to respond to instances of crisis and frustration with a love that doesn't seek vengeance, but instead justice. In this challenge, I believe that we must speak our truths, hold ourselves accountable, hold others accountable, and carry the values that we've inherited and that have been passed on to us by practicing revolution in our everyday lives.
Wow. 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 Thank you so much. We are going to jump into questions. I'm just trying to pick my mouth back up. It was dropped the entire time. So while people are putting questions into the chat, let me ask you a question to get us started. To me, you absolutely scream unapologetic, and I am the biggest fan of that. I mean, it is just everything. For somebody who is also so educated in terms of higher education, who also receives white education and as you mentioned earlier, things of that nature, there are people on this call who are trying to figure that out themselves, right? How do you balance that? What is it like as a woman of color, especially being, somebody from Africa, coming into, this space, right? This white-led space. And just kind of walk us through that a little bit and help us kind of, get a little bit of your journey. And I guess along the way, maybe put some pointers in for those to who want to follow in your footsteps in terms of just being so confident in your delivery, your words, your knowledge, and just who you are as a person.
Well, thank you so much. That's so kind, Jameson. You're incredible, fellow Husky. So it's always great talking to you. I'd say that one, my family has told me that this is my family has told me this is something that might be detrimental about me, but I've always been very transparent, and maybe I wear my heart on my sleeve a little bit too much, so I kind of just talk. But I would say the truth is, when it comes to being, a Black woman in, institutions of higher education and, gaining access to a lot of these prestigious spaces that have been and, arguably continue to be very difficult for folks of color, BIPOC, to enter into, something that always grounds me is my history, is my stories, which is why I think it's always important before I start to talk to really reflect back on who I am. Before any accolade, before any of these things, all of those titles, those accolades, they fade and waver over time, but what doesn't is your relationships, the ways that you make people feel, the way that people make you feel. And it's in those relationships that I think drive most of us. I mean, that drives me to do this work. I think climate work is hard work. It's emotionally exhausting. And honestly, I hope the only reason that most of us are doing this work is because we are so rooted in our love, and our love really does come from our community. So I say, remaining grounded in that, remembering why I do this work, remembering why my parents left their home in Kenya to come to the US, the fact that my family's still there, experiencing drought on the farm that we still have. The work that I do connects to all of that. So I think grounding ourselves in our truths, our ancestry, our family, our relationships are so important. And it goes right back into rehearsing revolution in our everyday lives.
Thank you. So your presence on social media is amazing, just like everything else that you touch, right? And talk to us a little bit about the Black Girl Environmentalist, right? What's your vision there? How do you plan on using that kind of as a vessel to really kind of push forward the things that you deem important? And how can people who kind of look at you today kind of follow in their own unique footsteps to kind of figure out where they could also have their own input?
Yes, thank you so much for asking about Black Girl Environmentalist. So Black Girl Environmentalist is a love project, a love community that I recently founded back in October. And that started from, this long standing experience that I've had as a Black woman in the environmental space. A lot of my work started with organizing in the state of Connecticut and experiencing being not only the only Black person, the only person of color, the only person under the age of 30 in a lot of these environmental activist spaces, and feeling very alone, feeling as though my narrative wasn't always one that was considered. I've been in this movement now, around 6 years. And even 2 years ago, when I was taking environmental courses, we weren't talking about environmental justice. This was not a conversation that was being had. It was me raising my hand and being like, so what about the social, political, economic ramifications, implications of the things that we're talking about? And oftentimes I was met with, girl, take a sociology class. It's not what we're doing here. I'd say that it was the frustration of that and feeling that I often would have to leave conventional environmental spaces, whether that was in academia, whether that was organizing, to feel fulfilled in, organizing and doing work that I felt was directly contributing to Black and Brown communities and the things that got me into this movement in the first place. And this summer, I wrote an article for Vice titled, It's Time for Environmental Studies to Own Up to Erasing Black Voices. I'm actually not the one who came up with the title, they did. But and in that, I kind of talked about my experience as a Black scholar and feeling as though, the Black narratives weren't at all centered. And the response that I got, particularly from Black girls, Black women, Black non-binary environmentalists around the country, really showed me that there is a place that must be there for us. So I founded Black Girl Environmentalists, which is essentially an intergenerational supportive community of Black girls, Black women, Black non-binary environmentalists. It's a safe space for us to discuss our experience as environmentalists and to really create content and programming and educational resources that center our experiences. When we talk about environmental education and Black Girl Environmentalists, we're not just talking about the ecology aspect. We're talking about the way that, say, colorism impacts our environmental experiences, right? Our understanding of the environment is absolutely tied to the environmental justice definition of the place we eat, sleep, pray, play. That includes our bodies, right? And when you have a phenomenon like colorism, which is discrimination based off of skin tone, and this is an issue interracially, intraracially, what ends up happening is that a lot of people feel as though they need to use skin lightening creams, for instance, to feel beautiful, to feel accepted. What people don't often talk about is the fact that these skin lightening creams are environmental hazards. These skin lightening creams, the hair straightening creams are deliberately advertised to Black and Brown people and contain a lot of poisonous chemicals that are detrimental to our reproductive health, our overall health. And the thing is even from an academic lens, the toxic impacts of these very deliberate advertising schemes are never assessed as a site of environmental analysis. So within Black Girl Environmentalists, we're changing the script. We're creating programming content that understands our experiences and really making sure that we don't have to exhaust ourselves in, the mainstream conventional environmental movement and kind of push ourselves into the spaces. Rather, we're just gonna build community with each other and make sure that those things are just part of who we are from the jump.
That is amazing. For those who don't know, Wawa and I share our home state of Connecticut. We both graduated from University of Connecticut as well. Huskies all day. We are basketball capital of the world. We're back at it, so I'll put that in there too. We both know personally kind of the impacts things like combined sewer systems and combined sewer overflows have, on our communities, right? Mainly New Haven, mainly Bridgeport, mainly Hartford, right? We also know Connecticut is very segregated, right? Anything south of Hartford is going to be Black up until you get to like the Greenwich and the Stanford area, right? And so we know this demographic very well. We lived in it. And so how do you balance trying to take action domestically versus trying to take action internationally, cooperating with that, right? And so kind of talk us through kind of your mindset there in terms of like, right now you're in England. Am I right? Right?
I've been meaning to correct you on this. I am based in Oxford most of the time, but I got stuck on this side when I came home for the holidays. So I've been tuning into classes on James time, which has been
Well, in spirit, you're there, and in your
spirit.
your times you're there. But yeah, just talk to us about like the way you kind of handle domestic versus international, and kind of how you find yourself. You know, you just being an international woman yourself.
Yes. I first have to say, Justin, I see your comment.
I
No.
saw that too.
No. So let me just
I was
address
gonna wait.
that.
I was gonna wait, but I'm glad you did.
This is something that I grapple with a lot. I felt very lost the year coming into being a senior at the University of Connecticut. I came to college very, very quiet. I hated public speaking. Anytime I tried to public speak, I would literally cry. I felt very new into the environmental sphere, and it was at UConn, in working with institutional policymakers, with doing grassroots environmental work in other parts of the state, that I really found myself and my voice in this movement. And like you said, Connecticut is one of the most segregated states in the country. It's also one of the wealthiest states with some of the poorest cities. And there's a lot of disparities that happen here. And I have felt really called to continue work here. But I also understood that I was, again, now signing up to go to a school outside of, not only outside of Connecticut, but outside of the US. And I felt a lot of guilt about that, almost like survivor's guilt of, I get this opportunity to leave this work, whereas the other people I'm organizing with, one, can't leave, and two, don't want to leave, and three, aren't going to leave. And I'm, leaving for 2 years to do what? That's something that I've had in my mind a lot. But I'd say with the pandemic and with everything with organizing really going online, with virtual organizing, I've seen the opportunity of what it means to build with people outside of the context of Connecticut, for instance. Like I said, doing a lot of this work in Connecticut, I felt alone a lot of the time. And it was in those feelings that I felt more called to do this work. And being, a part of, say, an organization like Black Girl Environmentalists, meeting people like you virtually and understanding that there are other BIPOC doing this work in our consecutive communities, it has provided so much energy for me, in which I can be in Oxford and I can stay and remain invested within the work that is being done in Connecticut. And I can't necessarily say that I would have had that same journey and that same recognition had this shift happen and had our world not, been flipped upside down. But now I know the possibilities of what organizing means virtually, and it's very exciting. And I feel so energized in being able to connect with people through campaigns like Reclaiming Our Time, which I believe Ariel is about to take over, someone very famous tomorrow, if Ariel hasn't told y'all, and their Instagram page. But that is something that, is something that I connect with a lot.
Thank you. So, yeah, I mean, you talked about, you mentioned a laundry list of people that inspired you, like over generations. Like the environmental justice movement is so much built in the, civil rights movement, right? On the shoulders of, people like Peggy Shepard from We Act, Bernice Travis Miller, and the laundry list just goes on. And so I just kind of want to hear a little bit more about kind of how the generations that came before us, who are currently still working with us, have inspired and continue to inspire you to do this work, and kind of just what are some of the ways I guess you collab with them, or you inspire to collab with them in the future, especially using your platforms like Black Girl Environmentalists.
Yeah, I think it's so important for especially us youth organizers to recognize, again, like I said in my talk, the fact that all of these movements that we're a part of, we're truly inheriting this language, everything from, Sunrise Movement is a perfect example of a movement that quite literally, read from the book of the civil rights movement, organizing styles, ways to really push politicians, push our society forward. I mean, it's quite literally by the book. And, you know, in my story, for instance, me watching Peggy Shepard and her TED Talk, that those 20 minutes changed my life. Those 20 minutes of her articulating the work that she was doing in New York City, the work that she continues to do, her ability to, you know, talk about sacrifice zones, break it down for someone that had never heard of this term. I understood what she was talking about. I simply didn't have the language to articulate it. My story directly is intergenerational knowledge being passed down to me. I think it's really important for us to ground ourselves in that as a way to understand that these problems, the weight, like I said, the weight of these problems aren't ours alone to experience, but also understand that there is so much that we have to learn, right? People have fought for their lives before. Like I said, climate change is not our first existential threat. And people have, Black people particularly, Black people from the South, know how to organize, you know, better than anyone in this country. And we should be turning towards
Absolutely.
these people in our community to give us the guidance to of how to conceptualize a just climate future. It's so interesting. Oftentimes people ask me, you know, well, where do you get your inspiration from today? And, you know, I spend all of my time, you know, in my textbooks reading climate policy and policy briefs and writing papers. And that's all very helpful. But to be honest, a lot of the language that I refer to right now are the words of abolitionists, people that understand what it means to not just work to dismantle systems, but have the language to conceptualize a future that's actually vested in justice for all of us. And that literally is what a just climate future is. But I think our responsibility as a movement is to coalition build with people already doing the work, who have been doing the work, and make sure that we're extending a hand of saying, hey, we're all fighting for the same thing. This movement has had a problem with articulating that, but we're not doing that anymore.
Thank you for that. Thank you. We got one more question, and then we'll graciously let you go. But I just want to reiterate, for those out there, this is a youth organizing event. So, Wawa said something that was extremely important, which is, just understand the history that came before you, while also trying to obviously build your own path. So, read up on people like Dr. Beverly Wright, Dr. Robert Buller. We mentioned Peggy Shepard, we mentioned Vernice Travis Miller. There's Dr. Kobe Wilson, there's Mustafa Ali, the list goes on, right? Adrian Hollis. So there's so many people out there that Jackie Patterson, and I'm saying names, I'm thinking of more, right? And so, just these names are very important and prominent names in our movement, whether it's the, environmental justice movement, the intersectional environmentalist movement, which is all the same to me. Just kind of know your history so you can kind of know where to go. And so the final question, I guess, for you would be, what are some of the economic paths or practices you see or imagine as part of the solution and revolution? So like, is it farmer collectives? Is it maternity funding and childcare policies? Worker cooperatives? Kind of what do you see as being the economic driving point?
Yeah, I'll be the first person to say that this area of climate is not necessarily the one that I work on. But I'd say, I'm reading the question.
Yeah.
I'd say it's all of that and more, right? When we think about, Leah Thomas, who came on earlier and who has done such incredible work of creating language of what intersectional environmentalism is. I think oftentimes people think it's just this sexy catchphrase that is a reinterpretation of environmental justice, but instead it's calling for, if we were to put an economic lens on these problems, it's saying, for instance, we're talking about maternity funding and childcare policies, and we're talking particularly about women and our experience with environmental stressors, right? Climate change hurts women first and worst around the world. Why? Because our voice and our physical and economic mobility continue to be taken away from us at varying degrees around the country. So when it comes to empowering women through economic paths like maternity funding, childcare policies, we can help build our mobility and allow us to be able to remain capable of defending ourselves against environmental stressors, as well as other social implications, because it's those social implications, economic implications, that allow us to be victims, first and worst victims of climate change in the first place. So supporting us, oftentimes supporting women, is a great path for ensuring that the world and our communities are empowered to be able to fight against things like climate change.
Exactly. Wawa, man, all I can say is thank you. We know how busy you are with everything that's going on school-wise, and obviously all the amazing things that you have going on a personal level with your social media and the Black Girl Environmentalist. So I send you nothing but good vibes your way, and hoping that takes off in the way that I know it will. If there's any way we can support as individuals or support as a community of Environmental Justice Law Society, please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know. But I just want to humbly thank you for spending time with us today. We appreciate it, every minute of it, for sure.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to again say, watch our Ariel's takeover tomorrow. She's going to do incredible, and we're all so excited. So thank y'all for listening to me. I feel so honored, and I hope everyone has an incredible rest of their days.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so with that, we'll highlight one more organization. So the final organization we would like to highlight today is Black Perspective. Unfortunately, the representative was unable to make it today, so I will kind of inform you just kind of the work that they do, their core values and their mission. So their core value, the Black Perspective's core values are all-inclusive and support of all minorities, including all colors, races, religions, genders, genderless, disabled, LGBTQAI+, with the main goal of elevating all BIPOC of Vermont and giving them a voice in fighting for their equity and equality. They serve the community. The mission in their goal, which navigates their organization, is solely based on elevating Black life. They want to focus on the racial Black struggle as a whole. They strive to educate our communities, on topics relevant to racism and injustice. Their end goal is to impact policy changes in Chittenden County, Vermont, that will transform education, jobs, and overall equity and growth opportunities for the BIPOC community. So we just want to take a second to be sure to highlight the Black Perspective. You can look in the chat and see some of the things that they wanted to do in terms of their action plan. So they wanted to, first and foremost, have you follow them on Instagram and all their social media, which is at the Black Perspective VT. They want you to sign up to the mailing list. And again, the mailing list is in the chat. This will allow you to get some information on their future events, as well as their volunteer list. They want you to really kind of contribute to their initiatives and focus on mutual aid funding, incorporate anti-racism policies, and create steps to address bias issues, support nonprofit organizations focused on social justice, and something near and dear to my heart, support local Black businesses. So while unfortunately they couldn't be here today to highlight themselves, we hope we did a part enough job in highlighting them. And please feel free to take advantage of the information put in the chat to either reach out to them and work with them in the future, or however your paths may cross.
All right, so we are almost at the end of our conference. So I would like to first thank everyone for being here today. And I would specifically like to call out our academic sponsors: Howard Law School, Yale School of Forestry and the Environment, Shaw University, the Duke Environmental Law and Policy Clinic, and of course, Vermont Law School. I want to thank our communications and production support, Karen Henderson from VLS, Claire Herman from Duke, and our Environmental Justice Law Society representative to the steering committee for this conference, Lauren Sherman. Thank you to all participating organizations and panelists. Special thanks to Leah, Justin, Wawa, the Sunrise Movement, Greening Youth, Her Healing LA, and Black Perspectives Vermont. And thank you to the EJLS general body members for their help throughout this entire process. And last but certainly not least, thank you to all of you who have attended today's session and this entire 3-session environmental justice convening. Now, Jameson is going to lead us in some meditative closings and then introduce our final speaker for the program. Thank you so much.
So we just wanted to do a really quick breathing technique just to kind of come down again as we did in the middle. Again, we really emphasize self-care because we know how hard you all work in these places. So take really 2 quick deep breaths in. We'll inhale, we'll hold it for a second. And we'll exhale. And then we'll take 1 more deep breath in, we'll inhale. Hold it. And then exhale. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Again, we just want to make sure we incorporate these, breathing techniques and small ways to kind of let yourself, self-care and take care of yourself as you're doing this work, right? We don't take enough rest. So we're not done yet. We still have 1 more speaker, and I am extremely excited to introduce you to Sierra, simply because I truly believe that there will be a time where no introduction is needed. So Sierra is an advocate for racial social justice and a current student at St. Johnsbury Academy in Vermont. She has delivered several speeches across the Northeast Kingdom in Vermont, and first made her appearance at a Black Lives Matter rally in Newport, Vermont. Today, she will close out our conference with a speech/performance. And again, we greatly thank you for spending this time with us. And we hope that you come and hear us in when we have other events. So without further ado, Sierra Manassa Curran.
Hi, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. Good afternoon. My name is Sierra Manassa Kernan, and I'd like to start off with a quote from Spike Lee. Quote, "It comes down to this. Black people were stripped of our identities when we were brought here. It's been a quest ever since to identify what we are," end quote. I don't think I've ever truly felt comfortable in my identity until this past summer. Up to that point, when race came into discussion, I turned away from it. Living in Vermont, one of the most predominantly white states in the country, it seemed like my identity had already been decided for me. I was the well-spoken Black girl. I was the not too dark Black girl, the token Black girl, if you will. I didn't grow up around a lot of Black people, so when people implied what they wanted me to be, I just kind of accepted that fate as mine. I was Black History Month. To my classmates, I was the pictures shown that were supposed to teach us about slavery. Women and their children being fire hosed were me. Lynchings were me. Unfortunately, I got used to it. The comments rolled over me and I didn't talk about it. And I threw myself into my writing and to performing. Performing was an amazing escape in art that I eventually fell in love with. But writing is what really helped me escape this world filled with stereotypes and stigmas and into another. I wrote of girls with beautiful skin kissed by the sun who had their own adventures with their big loving families far, far away from Vermont. And I continued to write and focused more on school. I thrived in English classes. And I seemed to have this natural ability to be able to read in between the lines of what the author wanted the audience to know. As I got older, reading and writing became easier. And so did ignoring the microaggressions and other forms of racism. But in the summer of 2020, I could no longer be silent. The killing of George Floyd sparked an anger in me that I don't believe I've ever felt before. Not just an anger for his killers, but an anger towards myself for allowing me to suppress a part of my identity to make it more tolerable to live where I was. I wanted to step up. I wanted to do more, but how? One night, I had a dream. I was running, trying to catch something that seemed impossible to reach. I stretched out my hands, but it wasn't mine. Everything felt familiar, but it wasn't at the same time. Anyone I ran past called me Earthshaker. Nothing in the dream was familiar to me, but I didn't feel lost. I was just floating above the ground. I realized people were chasing me, so I ran faster and faster until I ran into the woods. There was something about the woods that just felt untouched, like this is the way it was supposed to be. Then I heard it again, Earthshaker. I'm not quite sure what it was about that dream that sparked this courage within me, but suddenly I felt like I could take on the world. At my first protest, the megaphone was handed to me and I knew who I was. I'm Sierra Manasseh Kernan. I am a 17-year-old Black girl who lives in Vermont. I am a performer and a writer, and the world will hear what I have to say. At the protest that I attended and hosted, I would speak. And when I did so with every ounce of my being, knowing that when I speak, people listen. And the words that I craft and how I craft them will have an impact. Whether for better or worse, someone will grasp onto at least one thing that you say when speaking, and you want to make sure that it's the most important thing. You want to speak like your life depends on it, like other people's lives depend on it, because sometimes it does. Sometimes it's that one chant that brings a bystander into the light. It's that one phrase in a song that moves the nation. It's those 5 minutes that you have to make an impression, to leave an audience with something that you want them to remember. It's 5 minutes to use your arsenal of words to choose to say what you think is important and to share that with whoever's listening. So what do I want to tell you? What can I, a 17-year-old girl, tell you? The power of words is not to be underestimated. The power of words, your power, is what's going to fuel not only you, but everyone around you. It's going to shape their perspective, whether they like it or not. It's going to send them running. You are an Earthshaker. We are at a turning point in the world where we have no idea what's going to happen next. So choose what's going to happen. The power of your words right now are more important than ever. My identity as a Black woman was taken away from me at a very young age. My voice was taken away, along with the voices of every single Black person who ever felt like they didn't belong, despite their religion or their sexual preference or gender, despite what we're fighting for. Today, I would like to tell you that I know who I am now, and I know my strengths. I can only hope that you know yours. We are the leaders of our communities. We are their voices, whether we choose to be or not. But we cannot lose the momentum. The ball has been rolling for centuries, and we must continue to take steps towards a better, more equal world with more access to resources that everyone deserves, not tomorrow, not the day after tomorrow, but right now. We've already started, and by logging on today, we've already taken the next step. So I'm asking you as leaders, as voices, as Earthshakers, what will you do next? Thank you.
Man. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for spending time with us. That's what we have for our program today. That's a great way to end. Thank you, Sierra. We hope to see you next year. Enjoy your days. Thank you.